Okay. Welcome everyone to the Community Infrastructure Services Committee for Monday, October 4th, 2021. Due to COVID-19 and recommendations by Waterloo Region Public Health to exercise physical distancing, City Hall is open for select services. Members of the public are invited to participate in meetings electronically by accessing the meeting live stream video at kitchener.ca. Watch now. While in-person delegation requests are not feasible at this time, members of the public are invited to submit written comments or participate electronically in the meeting by contacting delegations at kitchener.ca. Please refer to the delegation section on the agenda below for registration deadlines. Written comments will be circulated prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. And accessible formats and communication supports are available upon request. If assistance to take part in the city meeting or event, please call 519-741-2345 or TTY 1-866-969-9994. Okay, so we're going to deal with our consent items. We have one consent item dealing on item 1.1, the Old Mill Sanitary Pumping Station. And we have one question, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about it.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions they would like to ask? Okay, with that, call to pull that item into discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Go ahead, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, there's a very substantial increase in the cost over budget, or a 41% increase. Is there no further explanation on that? I mean, this is not a new. Was there not already a station there? So should we not have known about the groundwater and all of that? That's a substantial difference.
Hans?
Through the chair, yes, it is a substantial difference. I can say that this is a complex project. It involved actually the removal of the old station. In a complex project such as this, I can say right at the beginning, we're changing the way that we're approaching these complex projects. The way this one, the assignment was handed out or given to MTE consultants, there were three parts to the assignment: an environmental assessment, a design, and then construction. And one part builds off of another. The environmental assessment informs the design, and the design informs the construction piece. Because of the complexities that came up along the way, we had to go about it differently than originally anticipated when we put together the terms of reference for MTE at the very start. That's why we have an increase in price, extra work that they've done. To prevent this from happening, or at least to minimize the risk of this happening in the future, what we're going to be doing is separating assignments. We will have one assignment for a consultant for the environmental assessment, which will then provide us with more information on which to build the terms of reference for the design. Once the design is done, that will again provide us with information on how long the project might take, and it will give us a better terms of reference information for the construction part. So there will be 3 assignments that will be tendered for upcoming and for future complex works such as this. I can say that the work that MTE has done is the work that was requested and was required.
Forgive me, but I really don't understand where you're coming from. You say that we have changed the way we're doing things, and you've made some explanations. I can see your explanations could result in some minor changes, but what is it that really caused a 41% jump? There's got to be some special things or something pretty drastic that would cause that kind of a change.
Through the chair, yes. In fact, there are the 4 items that are listed on the second page. The one thing that really took a big bite and is most of the cost is the fact that the construction itself was anticipated to be based on 240 working days of construction. In actual fact, it's more like 360. So that's a 50% increase in the duration of the consultant being on site and doing the construction. And on top of that is the extra tender for pre-qualification, testing of groundwater because of quality exceedances, which we didn't know in the beginning, and then the record of site condition in order for the old pumping station site to become a lookout. So those are 4 items that did cause the exceedance. We are satisfied that the effort that was put into it and the costs are in fact representative of what needed to be done.
I'm still not satisfied, but do we have any options? Is there anything we can do?
Through the chair, no, we've agreed that these prices are reasonable. We've reviewed them. We've worked with a consultant, and we recommend that these are the prices that are necessary in order for the work to be properly completed.
Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor Gazzola. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ioannidis. And Mr. Gross, thank you very much for answering those questions. And I think that Councillor Gazzola asked some really good questions. It is a big change in terms of the pricing there. If we can't do anything to kind of mitigate what the costs are for this project, are there learnings in that we're going to be able to take to be able to look at future projects or other ones that are going on right now, so that we don't run into such a big issue again?
Through the chair, the answer is yes, and I alluded to that at the beginning, and perhaps it wasn't quite clear what I said was that in going forward, we have upcoming complex projects such as this, and to minimize the risk of going over budget and causing issues that way, what we're going to do is we're going to be tendering the individual components of the project separately, individually. So we will ask consultants to provide a price for the environmental assessment part only. Once we have that done, then we have good information on which to provide the terms of reference for a design. Once the design is done as a separate assignment, then we have more information to add to the tender package and the construction package, because then we will have a really good idea how long it's going to take to get the work done and all the complexities involved. So that will be a third tendered assignment for tender for consultants. What that will do is it will minimize the risk of overruns on each of those 3 pieces. Whereas on this particular pumping station, all those 3 pieces were included in one tender for a consultant on which to tender. And unfortunately, when we do the terms of reference for projects at the very beginning, we don't know all the things that are going to come at us. And this is why we're changing the way we do it, so that we can better represent the costs as well as the terms of reference of the pieces of the assignment.
Thank you. I think it's really good to kind of learn a little bit more about that background info and about where we're going to go in the future. So I think that's really important. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. We have no further questions. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Michaud, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we will move on to discussion items and dealing with item 3.1, the neighborhood speed limit review. And we have Aaron and Franarak to provide us an opening presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, the chair. Can you start?
Sure.
Good afternoon to the committee and the chamber. My name is Farana Hosseini, and my position here at the city's transportation planning project manager, and I've been overseeing the neighborhood speed limit review project. Today, I'm joined by Barry Cronkite, Director of Transportation Services, and Aaron McCrimmon-Jones, Manager of Transportation Services. And I'm going to provide an introduction and an overview of the report to start. So in support of neighborhood safe streets, staff initiated a study to review posted speed limit reduction from 50 kilometers per hour to 40 kilometers per hour in Kitchener's residential neighborhoods. Staff brought forward a report in August of 2019, which was approved by council and recommended that a pilot project be conducted in 3 residential neighborhoods in Kitchener to evaluate the effectiveness of lowering the speed limits on operating speeds. Through the pilot, the speed limits of 3 residential neighborhoods were reduced, including Huron area, Dune South area, and Idlewood area, and speeds in these areas were reduced from 50 to 40 kilometers per hour using the gateway signage approach, which the entrances and exit points of the neighborhoods were signed. And the speed limits of school zones within these areas were further reduced from 40 kilometers per hour to 30 kilometers per hour. The pilot results showed that reducing the speed limits coupled with education efforts was effective in reducing the operating speeds. The results showed that the vehicle operating speeds were reduced by 3 kilometers per hour on average, or 7%, and even more speed reduction was observed in higher operating speed thresholds. The results observed was also consistent with the experience of other municipalities with neighborhood speed limit reduction projects. Public engagement data also showed public support for lower speed limits in residential neighborhoods. Staff conducted an online survey which showed that 57% of the respondents are in support, with 17% being neutral. Another online survey conducted through the Vision Zero project also showed support for speed reduction, and it showed that speeding was one of the top concerns and priorities for residents in Kitchener. So based on the results of the pilot, staff recommend that the speed limit in all residential neighborhoods within the city be reduced from 50 kilometers per hour to 40 kilometers per hour. And to differentiate more vulnerable areas, staff recommend that speed limit of school zones and along neighborhood bikeways be further reduced from 40 to 30 kilometers per hour. The speed limit zones identified are mostly bounded by regional roads, city arterial roads, and some major collector roads. These border roads are excluded from the project, and because these higher order roads are intended to move larger traffic volumes, they will remain at their current speed limits. The estimated capital cost of this proposal is $550,000, which includes cost for signage and installation, as well as a robust communication and engagement plan. Staff are proposing that the project be implemented over 3 years from 2022 to 2024. And the timeline proposed is based on operations, staff capacity, communications, and educational campaigns that need to be planned and implemented. Also alignment with timelines of other municipalities within the region. The implementation time proposed is also consistent with the implementation time of other municipalities, such as the City of Toronto or the City of Hamilton. Yeah, so that was the introduction and an overview of the report. Thank you for listening. We will be happy to take questions now.
Through the chair, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. Are all the questions that everyone wants to ask, is it for staff, or can we all wait till we hear the delegation?
Staff for me.
It's all staff? Okay.
Okay, I think we should maybe hear the delegation though, Councilor Ioannidis.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like, I want to hear the delegation first. So I have you guys all in order. So I know it's a big list. So I have Dave, Kelly, Barry, Christine, Margaret, Debbie, John, Paul, and Scott and Sarah. I'm still waiting for you two to click in to make it a full house. But but anyways, yeah. So we'll go to our delegation, and I'll have that order for everyone. So in case they want to ask the delegate some questions. So we have Kevin Litwiller. I'm not sure. Oh, he's in. Okay, Kevin, welcome. You have 5 minutes to present your delegations.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you to the chair and to the committee for giving us an opportunity to speak a little bit here today. Just as an FYI, this was kind of last minute for me, so I'm coming as prepared as I can to present and discuss some of the concerns that we have here in the Dune South neighborhood. So I'll start off with the positive, because I believe that's always the best way to start any conversation, is that, I'm born and raised here in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. My family's been business owners here for over 90 years, Waterloo Printing Company. Some of you may be familiar with it over the years. And, I'm a proud Kitchener-Waterloo resident and ratepayer. And I've seen so many good things happen in our community over the last, I don't even want to say how many years, because that'll just date me, but we've grown from being a manufacturing community, predominantly reliant upon major manufacturing back in the day, to, transitioning into being, still some manufacturing, but a knowledge-based economy. And I'm really proud of all the things that the community has done over the years. And with growth, of course, that brings more people to our neighborhoods and to our community, more diversity, different points of view. And it also brings a certain level of vibrancy to our communities, which is a good thing. When, we also add new schools and we meet new neighbors, and those are all good things. Unfortunately, there's also been a dark side or a downside to this growth, and that is, what I can only share with you that we see in this neighborhood as a complete disrespect for traffic speeds and, politeness and the rules of the road. And, I completely embrace and celebrate the idea of lowering traffic speeds, but quite frankly, those are only as good as people's willingness to obey them, and our ability as a community to enforce those reduced speeds. And I can speak to this pretty confidently because we have a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed sign right in front of our house, because as people make their way up through our street here on Apple Ridge Drive and past J.W. Girth School and into the new area that's been developed in the last few years, I see every day what the actual driving habits of people are. And if their speed has been reduced by 7%, it doesn't make much of a difference if that's reducing from 90 kilometers an hour to whatever 7% less of that is. And the reality is that, you know, if anybody wanted to, and I invite anyone who's interested to sit with me in front of my house on any given day of the week, especially during rush hours, you're going to witness that 30 kilometers an hour is not only ignored, but people are absolutely flippant about it. And I'm going to give you a real life example of something that happened just recently that was really scary for us as ourselves and our community members. Is we have a group of fathers that's taken to playing pickleball at the JW Girth School in the early evening hours to try to get some of our calories off. So we go there in the early evenings, which is, you know, usually around 5:30, 6 o'clock till about 8 o'clock in the evening. And we play pickleball on one part of the JW Girth parking lot, which the principal has been more than gracious to allow us to do. And right next to there is a crossing for community members that are enjoying the Tilt Trail. And if you know the neighborhood at all, what happens is the Tilt Trail crosses Apple Ridge Drive at that point. And, you know, on this particular day, we were playing pickleball, and there was a family crossing the street, mother, father, a couple little children, and she was pushing a baby carriage. And 3 vehicles came, you know, upon the crossing, and they all slowed down and stopped respectfully to wait for the family to cross the street. And then while that was happening, another vehicle decided that he was going to try to pass all 3 vehicles and scream into the neighborhood. And quite frankly, if it wouldn't have been for the fact that there was about 30 community members that all raised their voices and screamed at him, he probably would have taken the entire family out. And this is the kind of thing that we're observing on a regular basis here on Apple Ridge Drive. And I know what's happening in other neighborhoods throughout the community. I know we're not unique, but, you know, I guess I've been attending traffic calming meetings now in our neighborhood dating back about 10 years. We've lived on this street for 15 years. And I've seen some changes, you know, as an example, the lowering of the speed limit and some of those little yellow, I don't know what you call them, but signs that get put in the middle of the road to slow people down. But unfortunately, what we've observed is that instead of the situation getting better, it's getting worse. And I've heard talk of, you know, speed cameras and things like that being available to put into different school zones. And I guess my reason for appearing here today is to ask, you know, what can we expect as a community to get some real action in terms of calming these people down? It's getting really scary. And our fear is that somebody's going to get really badly hurt or killed before something really concrete happens. And so I'm here to, you know, present those concerns. Like I said, you know, I understand that there's a proposal forward to slow down, you know, via signage. But I guess my question is, what good does signage do if people decide they're going to ignore it? And if that doesn't come with some kind of enforcement to back it up, you know, where do we go from here as a community, and how can we get our concerns addressed? Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And we have a question for you from Councillor Michaud. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. I wanna thank you for coming out today and sharing your story. I know you and I talked at length on Friday about this, and you know, we need citizens to come forward and share their real life experiences because you are living it. I have a question though, with regards to the 40-kilometer speed limit. What else could you see being an addition to the 40-kilometer that may help slow people down? Like, how do you feel about speed bumps along the road, particularly Apple Ridge?
Well, thank you, Christine. That's a great question. So this discussion has been had. Like I said, I've been attending various traffic calming meetings in this neighborhood for quite a few years now. And my overriding impression, and this is also based on conversations with my neighbors on the street here, is that, you know, people will basically are ready for almost anything to help to calm the traffic down. you know, if you put a speed bump right in front of my house, am I going to tell you that I'm going to love it? No, but I will embrace it. I will embrace it because it brings safety, and anything that's going to stop the madness that's happening right now, quite frankly, would be warmly embraced from my point of view and from the conversations that I've had with many of my neighbors. And we've also suggested, for example, you know, more stop signs. I'm not an expert on traffic flow and all that kind of stuff and examining how that affects things. Of course, I'm just a citizen, but you know, there's a street that comes out onto Apple Ridge Drive called Ridgemere. And, you know, it's a perfect place to add another stop sign to at least try to see if we can mitigate, you know, what's happening on the street. So I think, you know, you would find that there's an openness, you know, to anything that's going to help us, you know, live with less fear is what it really comes down to.
And then one last question, Kevin, you live on obviously a street where there's a school, public school. So is your neighborhood predominantly young families with young children, or?
Yes. Yes. I mean, if you look at Apple Ridge Drive or Pine Valley or Ridgemere or any of those, you know, and I haven't done the actual count to verify this, but my estimation is that every second house has kids in it, little kids from teens and tweens. And, you know, it's just this is you know, an up and coming community, as you all know, and it's a lot of young families, and a lot of young families move here. It's a very attractive neighborhood. And, you know, all you have to do is walk around here any given night and you'll see families out walking with their children. And yeah, there's tons of kids. Every second house would be my estimation.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate you coming out today.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you to the committee and chair for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Or I think, is that all the questions from members?
Okay, I'm happy to answer any more.
Well, Kevin, I mean, the question that you're asking for is, you know, something that if we had a tool that could actually, you know, fix that right away, it would be the street cameras. And until we get, you know, until we get more used to those street cameras, until we get more usage out of those street cameras and get a bigger budget for those kind of street cameras, and we collaborate even more with the region so we can have our own, I guess, your concerns will be concerns, but the best thing we can do is always, you know, add more tools to our toolbox. And kind of like what we're putting forth today in the report, it's not gonna solve everything, but some of the evidence shows it does slow things down. So that's all I can say. I mean, I wish we had that magic wand that we could solve that issue, because it's not just in this area, it's throughout the whole city.
No, and you know, I appreciate that, Chair Ioannidis, and I guess one of the things that's been a little bit frustrating for some of us is that, you know, we heard about the cameras coming quite a while back, and because Apple Ridge Drive, I know that there's been many residents, including myself and a few others, that have gone to these meetings over the last 10 to 15 years. We were, I guess, under the erroneous assumption that we would be pretty high on the list in terms of getting that implemented here in our neighborhood, and it just didn't happen. I know at one point Apple Ridge was on high on the consideration for those cameras, but for some reason we fell off. So I guess all I can say is my request is, you know, please don't forget us as you roll these solutions out, and put us, you know, high on the priority list. And if not just for me and my concerns, which is, you know, only one person, but I mean, we have the school on our street, and we have a lot of little kids crossing to go to school every day. And my fear is like something bad is going to happen, and I'd rather be in front of it than behind it myself.
For sure. And I guess we have one more further question for you, Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Actually, thank you, Chair Ioannidis. I was wondering actually if Mr. McCrimmon Jones might actually answer some of the questions for the delegate. I think that might be better, especially ones around the region and their budget for the speed enforcement cameras.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Through the chair, the councillor. ASC, the Automated Speed Enforcement Program, it's a regional run program. that we are working with regional colleagues and other municipalities to determine which locations are the most appropriate based on a series of criteria. And that work's been ongoing for about a year. The region is leading further work, working with the province and the processing center in Toronto to work out all the administration and logistics that go into the automated speed enforcement program. So in terms of what we're looking at in Kitchener, we've developed an evaluation system and criteria to determine what the highest priority schools are based on risk. And we're looking at speed, volume, exposure, meaning how much volume is there and how many pedestrians are there? What does the infrastructure look like? Are there sidewalks? How wide are the roads? Is there cycling infrastructure? And all of this goes into a scientific model that's been peer reviewed by the University of Waterloo to determine what the highest priority locations are across the region, but specifically in Kitchener. So the region is currently installing the first locations as part of phase 1A. Phase 1B are the second locations. So there'll be a total of 16 locations across the region. And they're going to use all the data and information that they gather from phase 1 to develop phase 2, which will then additional cameras, hopefully in 2023. The biggest pinch point with automated speed enforcement is the sheer number of tickets that gets generated from a camera, and the amount of administration and processing resources that we have in the region, and that the processing center, the joint processing center has in Toronto. So that's the biggest pinch point, and what we're working through with the region. But we're in the very early stages of ASC, and we're excited to see the results that we get from it.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Do we have any
May I ask a question back to Aaron?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair Ioannidis. So Aaron, where would we as citizens be able to go to obtain the details of that, the information that you just shared?
Sure. So if you Google automated speed enforcement region of Waterloo, they have a webpage dedicated for the automated speed enforcement program. They recently went to their regional council I believe it was in September, and it has all the details of that scientific model and what it looks like. It is a fluid model, I should note. So we constantly update the data. We're trying to find the best ways to evaluate all of these schools that we have across the region. So it changes year over year, depending on where the highest risk lies. But if you Google that information, it'll put you to the webpage, and you can get in contact with staff through that as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back to questions of staff, and I guess Aaron, you may as well stay where you are. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis, and at the appropriate time, I'd like to move this. Just want to know, Ward 2 is part of the pilot project, and the signs were, the 40K signs were at what you call Gateway Road. So as we look out over the city, can you give me an idea of what a gateway road might be described as and the criteria for where the signs will be located for 40K?
Sure. Through the chair to the councillor. So a bit of background, the neighborhood-wide approach was approved through the Highway Traffic Act in 2018. And that allows us to define neighborhoods using boundary roads or other features of a neighborhood, such as a park. And we can use that then to any entry point from a road entering that neighborhood is the point where we would notify drivers that the speed limit is changing. There is a map attached to the staff report, which identifies all the different zones. There's about 70 of them. And signing those entry and exit points is a more cost-efficient way of doing this than needing to sign every single roadway within the neighborhood and in set increments. In addition to that, signing every single road would also lead to a lot more sign pollution on the streetscape. In addition to the capital costs, there's obviously ongoing maintenance costs for the life of those assets, and the signs do need to be inspected annually. So there's 3 types of setups that we use. There's the entry sign, which has the 40-kilometer sign with an area tab and a begins tab. The exit sign, which is the same, except it has an exit tab instead of a begins tab. And then any sign within that neighborhood would have a 40-kilometer sign just with an area tab. So we're not actually going to remove any signs. We know we have speed limit signs in some of these neighborhoods. We'll just update them with the 40-kilometer sign along with an area tab so it meets HTA requirements. So that's the criteria and the locations and what the signs will look like. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Now I did get comments during the pilot that having a 40K sign on some problem streets might be helpful. I know you touched on that a little bit, but in the future, might we consider having like a few streets that are more problem streets with a 40K sign in addition to the gateways?
Through the chair, that's possible. We're undoubtedly going to see varying results from street to street and neighborhood to neighborhood. And for us, it's understanding why that's happening. It could be the design of the road. It could be the community isn't necessarily receiving the educational materials in the way that we want them to. And we, of course, have our other formal traffic calming programs, seasonal traffic calming and resident-led programs to help address that. Adding more signs is a possibility, although we do hope that through all the education and outreach that we're going to do, most drivers will be well aware of the new speed limits. And, you know, like any of our traffic calming programs and even our most intensive tools that we have available, we're unable to calm the speed of all drivers. So this is just one tool in the toolbox. We've seen positive results and we hope we can replicate that at a citywide scale. But adding more signs may be an option on a case-by-case basis, depending on the context of the roadway and the neighborhood.
Okay, and just one final question. Do we have to have signs that say 40K speed limit ends as they exit and onto a major road? I'm just thinking like psychologically, people say, okay, great, now I can have at it and give her. Do we have to have the 40K limit end signs?
Through the chair, yes, as per the requirements of the HTA. And then whatever road they're transitioning on, which will usually be a higher order road, such as a regional road, the speed limit on that road would then apply.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I think I have just 2 questions. My first one is with regards to it being blanketed across the city. I didn't see in the report, or maybe I missed it in the report. Are other cities doing that, or are they just doing specific subdivisions?
Through the chair to the councillor, the HTA, the Highway Traffic Act, and the bill that was approved in 2019, it only allows municipalities to do the neighborhood approach. So every city is designated 50 kilometers an hour unless otherwise signed. So through this approach, we are doing the neighborhood areas, and all other municipalities that we're aware of are following a very similar process to that.
As in ones within the region or ones that were referenced in the report?
Through the chair, the other municipalities in the region and other municipalities within the province.
Okay. My second question is with regards to Huron Road. Am I concerned that Huron Road is 60 kilometers? I know it's not going to go down to 40. I don't expect it to go down to 40, but is there any way we can look at it at 50 kilometers an hour? The other roads that you referenced within that section of the report, like Strasburg Road, Queens Boulevard, Belmont, Block Line Road, those are all 50-kilometer roads, if I'm not mistaken. Is there any way we can look at Huron Road going from 60 to 50 kilometers?
Through the chair, yes, that's definitely something that we can look at. We'll be updating the bylaw through this process, so we can likely address that when the bylaw is formally updated.
Councillor Galloway Seelock?
Okay, thank you. I think I was picking it up there, so I think I got the answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Urbanovic.
Thanks very much, Chair Ioannidis, and thank you to staff for all of their work on this long-awaited report. Because I know back from my days as a ward councillor and even continuing now, traffic issues are probably one of the more significant issues, particularly speed issues in neighborhoods are probably one of the most significant issues that we hear about in the community. I think, Mr. McCrimmon Jones, you touched on the one question I was going to ask is, so there is not an environment where we can say all of the city of Kitchener is 40 kilometers, save and except for the roads we mark otherwise, because it would seem that, looking at this, it would be the much easier way to do that if we were able to, in fact, say that that was the case, and then you only go and mark the river roads, the Ottawa streets, the Westmounts, and so on. But if I understand you correctly, the provincial legislation does not allow us to do that.
Through the chair to the mayor, that's correct. We asked this question directly to MTO staff fairly recently, and the response we got was that there was a lot of engagement done with municipalities across the province 10, 15 years ago and leading up to the approval of the bill. And this is the approach that they've approved for municipalities to take.
Okay, I mean, if that engagement was done 10, 15 years ago, is it fair enough to surmise that things have maybe changed a little bit? And like if we had the option of being able to do that, is that a route we would prefer to go?
Through the chair.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Through the chair to the councillor or mayor. I think it would result in a situation where we still needed the same amount of signs. We would have to sign wherever the speed limit was changing from, say, a regional road to a local road. We would have to notify drivers of that, and then vice versa. We know that regional roads aren't going to change, and we have a number of roads that are under our jurisdiction that we don't feel are necessarily appropriate for a 40 kilometer an hour speed limit. So we would likely end up in a situation where we needed the same amount of signs. Having said that, if there was enough advocacy at the provincial level, it is an approach we could take. But again, the amount of signs required would likely be the same.
Okay. And if that's the case, then maybe it is a moot point to go and try to get some support to see that change. So if I understand you correctly, and I'm probably most familiar with areas 64 and 65 on your map. So the process would require that on any of these gateway roads. So I think of, for example, in 64, you've got Ottawa Street as a boundary and looks like River Road and Lackner. So you would have streets like Holborn, like Old Chicopee, like Shaftesbury, like Oldfield. Those would all be considered gateway roads, and you'd have to put signs there coming off of Ottawa Street or off of River Road into those neighborhoods. And then are you also saying, if I understood your response to Councillor Galloway Seelock correctly, that we would also need to put this zone ends signs before we hit Lackner again, or River or Ottawa?
Through the chair, maybe I can jump in with this one. And that's exactly the point, Mr. Mayor. It's not a gateway road per se, it's the intersection. You have to sign it at the intersection as you're coming off call it the arterial road. Once you're exiting and you're going back into that arterial road, we have to say that area ends, simply because then the speed limit of the next street applies. So you do need those two signs on either end of the project, the street.
And so that's actually a requirement of the HTA. Like, because if you think of, on a highway, it typically doesn't say 60 ends and 80 or 80 ends and 100 starts. It simply says what the next speed is. So I'm just wondering why the different approach. Like, would it not be sufficient to just have the speed coming off the gateway into the neighborhood that's reduced, and then back on Lackner simply have a 60 kilometer or 50 kilometer sign there?
Through the chair, the way that neighborhood areas need to be signed is very prescriptive in the Highway Traffic Act and the bill that they came into. So yes, in order to be able to do this, we have to follow that prescriptive approach, which is the area begins and area ends sign. But you would have to sign at the end regardless, whether you signed on the major roadway or you signed the neighborhood ends. You still need to do that differentiation in the speed limit.
Right, but then if you take Lackner as an example, which is 60, I believe, yes. So you would need to have a sign coming out of the neighborhood saying that the 40 ends, and then you would still need a 60 because it's not a 50, telling people that it's a 60.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, it just seems a little bit overkill signage wise, quite frankly, and perhaps something that staff may want to take a look at to see if we want to be doing some advocacy with the province on this issue, because I'm extremely supportive of us going in this direction, but it seems that the province is complicating it a little more than they need to.
Okay.
Yep.
Your time's up.
Okay, I'll come back in.
Give me extra time.
I'll come back in. Thanks, Chair Ioannidis.
Okay. Councillor Michaud.
Mr. Mayor, you could have had a few more minutes of my time. I only have a couple of questions. But I want to thank staff for this report. I'm really happy to see this come forward. We've been waiting a while for it, and it's a good report. I have a question with regards to the time frame. What would it cost if there is a cost increase if we tried to do this over 2 years instead of 3? The community is growing, especially out here, in particular to Ward 4 and Dune South area is growing exponentially. And the longer we take to do this, the worse things seem to get. So I'd really like to see us shorten this time frame if possible. I think it would really be a good start in the right direction. I think there's a lot more we have to do for traffic calming, but I think that this is a good start. And I'll ask another question right away as well. Is Waterloo I know I've heard rumblings that Waterloo is going to be doing this too. Are we going to do a cohesive plan with Waterloo and partner with them to try, because obviously the cities go from, I think Councillor Johnson knows this, goes from Kitchener to Waterloo right in the middle of a yard. So how would that work? So there's 2 questions for you. Thanks.
Through the chair to the councillor, we've coordinated with our operations staff, and we may be able to get this project done in less than 3 years, possibly 2. However, we do need to be mindful of staff capacity just because of the scale of the project. We are installing almost 1,500 new signs, and this includes manufacturing those signs and the labor to install them. And there are other variables such as coordinating locates. In addition to that work, we are going to be rolling out a fairly extensive communication education plan, which includes mail-outs to the entire city. We feel that part of the success of what we saw in the pilots was directly tied to the fact that we had a direct touch point with everyone that lived in those neighborhoods, and then along with social media campaigns. Mm-hmm. And then worth pointing out also, which you touched on a little bit, is that City of Waterloo and City of Cambridge, they're currently running their own pilots to determine what this means in their context. So therefore, a 2 or 3 year rollout on our end, it does allow those neighboring municipalities some additional time to get caught up to where the City of Kitchener is, and hopefully allowing for more of a consistent rollout more regionally.
But I think that would be more in line of having a success of this whole project if you have a cohesiveness across the region as far as the cities go.
Through the chair, there is budget implications in accelerating the program, so we should highlight that. Currently, it's proposed to be over 3 years, so keep in mind that should council ask staff to look at this to be accelerated over 2 years, you need to reconsider the budget as well. And we have referred this to the 2022 capital discussion. The other thing to highlight with Waterloo and Cambridge and neighboring townships in terms of moving this forward, everybody is generally on the same page in terms of doing something. They're in a very similar position to us in terms of not only the concern, but the want and desire to bring this forward. And at least from a staff level, we can tell you that everyone is aligned. There is, if we extend this over 2 to 3 years, it gives the other municipalities and townships the ability to catch up in terms of getting a more holistic regional approach to speed limits.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Michaud and Aaron. I don't want the other municipalities to catch up so fast. We don't want them going fast. This is the point, no. Anyways, Councillor Michaud.
Johnson.
Oh, sorry. I mean, Councillor Johnson. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis, and thank you so much, staff. This is such an exciting report to see. As you've mentioned, this is the #1 issue that we hear from residents. And you indeed then hear from this as well as we follow up with you and your team. So this is very well timed, and I'm very appreciative of all the data and all the work that you've put into to really look at this from a holistic perspective. And it's interesting though, as I've heard the councillors and the mayor go before me to bring up things that are the exact things that I've been thinking about. The amount of money that is going into this, it seems to be a lot of it is around the signage. And being, as Councillor Michaud already said, being a councillor that is right next to Waterloo, where they have an uptown pilot going on right now, where they have 4 to 5 of the flexi speed signs with the 40 kilometers on them in the middle of their road. And then that street then extends into Kitchener. And we have 0 signs because I have very few signs to put across my entire ward. So I'm hearing from the Westmount residents that it's a problem for them, that they then think that when they leave Waterloo, it's no longer 40, or it's not, well, they don't need to continue the speed that they've been going through the uptown neighborhood there. So when signs end, it really does send a message to people that they have a free rein on those roads. And it truly is a concern for the Westmount neighborhood. Perhaps Councillor Marsh is noticing that as well, because I know in her ward that there's, again, with the uptown pilot that's going on in Waterloo, that those roads extend into her ward as well. So I'm wondering if it would be, if we can put kind of an amendment in with this, with the staff report, to include a piece where we're putting forward to the provincial government that we need to look at the signage piece here, and that it's ridiculous to me. The bulk of this money is going to be spent on signage, and which might then extend the amount of time before we cannot put some real actionable pieces in place. Would that be something that we can now add to this to change the signage piece? Because to me, as the mayor was saying, when you say something ends, they're going to think that they have free reign, and we're seeing that in Westville.
Through the chair, I think that there's 2 probably really quick comments I can make here. And the first is around advocacy. So the one thing that I will say is that you have a report in front of you today with recommendations. If you amend it to, to ask staff to do that advocacy and push to have reduced signs, that would delay the project that you have before you here today. And so in all likelihood, that means that we wouldn't be able to do this or get this started in 2022. So something to keep in mind is that advocacy can inherently delay the overall project. And then the other part that I would mention is, with the City of Waterloo and the border streets, there's an agreement. We've worked with their staff to ensure that we have a very similar routine approach as we move forward to make sure that, a driver entering or exiting Kitchener or Waterloo borders has that same feel and approach. So that's something that's being worked on between staff at the two cities.
Are we getting the data from them in terms of their how has improved theirs? And then I don't know if we're looking at data then as they enter into Kitchener after these slow signs end. Is that something we've done or can look at?
Through the chair, I would suggest we're probably going down a rabbit hole here in terms of talking about Waterloo's approach to traffic calming in 2021 versus how it impacts our streets. It's something that we can have, we can take a conversation offline, I think, Councillor Johnson, so that, if you want more information, we can figure out exactly what you want us to look at with the City of Waterloo. But, there's a lot more to discuss there that we could do outside of this meeting.
And I appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Cronkite, because it's not something that I had brought up with you before. It's something that has really kind of come up this weekend as this report has come out. I had another question also around the signage, and many communities that you drive into when you enter the community will say something like, please consider, or all speeds in this community are considered to be 50 kilometers per hour unless otherwise noted. And again, I think that's what Mayor Verbanovic brought up too. There's nothing there that kind of covers it, or could we at least have those types of signs as you enter between Waterloo and Kitchener?
Through the chair, no, those signs are legislated by the Highway Traffic Act. So those signs that you're referring to need to say 50 kilometers an hour unless otherwise posted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. And thank you for this report. I agree that it's important that we try to look to ways to calm traffic throughout the city. Most of my questions have been asked, but I did want to ask, and this is in some ways in response to Kevin's earlier delegation presentation. Signs are only so good to calm people's driving speed. So are there any things that staff is thinking about to pair with these traffic signs or slower speed signs? Because I think if all we do is put the signs up, I question how much of a change we're actually going to see. So what thoughts do you have along those lines?
Through the chair, that's probably a good segue into what you'll see staff bring forward in December, which is the Vision Zero strategy. So, what you see in front of you today in terms of the speed limit review is really one tool in the toolbox of what is going to be a holistic suite of, call it the 5 E's of Vision Zero that we plan to present to council in December. So, to your question, Councillor Chapman, yes, there will be other avenues to try to curtail traffic.
Okay, I look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, can staff tell me, what are these roads that we're talking about? What are they constructed to handle? What speed?
Through the chair to the councillor, are we talking about the neighborhood roads within these neighborhood areas?
Yeah, these roads that we're changing. What are they constructed to handle? What speed?
Through the chair to the councillor, generally roads are designed for an operating speed of 60. However, there are a lot of variables when we're looking at how these roads operate. There's different widths, on-street parking, mature trees, whether or not there's traffic calming there. All of these things go into how drivers operate on any given road.
Yeah, but if the roads are constructed to handle those speeds and the drivers get into them, that's a problem right from the get-go, right there.
So through the chair, through the data that we collected before the pilots started, we were looking at the average speed in these neighborhoods. And what we found was that the average speed was below 50 kilometers an hour, around 48 kilometers an hour across all three. So we know that the average speed, the average driver is driving in and around that speed limit. However, the 85th percentile speed, the speed at which 85% of drivers travel at or below, is a little bit higher, on average around 55 kilometers an hour. So there is some compliance there, and we hope that when we lower, if approved, to 40 kilometers an hour, we begin to see that shift like we did in the pilot areas where drivers were closer to 40 kilometers an hour into the low 40s.
Through the chair, if I could add, the one thing to highlight here is the speed that Aaron mentioned in terms of 60 kilometer an hour design speed. That was the traditional speed that was used in previous transportation planning, going back into the 60s and 70s. What this council did was approve the Complete Streets guidelines back in 2020, and as part of that, a new design speed was established at 10 kilometers an hour over the posted speed limit. So moving forward, when we talk about street design, it looks much different than what we've traditionally seen in the city.
Okay, thank you. It appears we're not really sure at this point what Cambridge and Waterloo are going to do or are doing, so it's going to be pretty confusing driving around this region. One of the questions I had, are there any collision and accident reports that should come in with the report that you're showing the before and after? Were there any statistics that you can present that shows what actually happened as far as collisions were concerned? You've shown some details on speeds, but what's the actual accident reporting?
Through the chair to the councillor, the pilot projects likely not run long enough to understand the impacts on collisions, although we know that there's a direct correlation between speeds and the number of collisions, and specifically the severity of those collisions. Looking at other municipalities across Canada who have rolled these programs out a little bit longer than we have, they have seen some positive reduction in their collision rates, and there's some more details in that in the staff report.
Well, should we not have a substantial amount of that information right now if we're going to go into this new program? How do we judge the new program down the road if we don't have that sort of information?
Through the chair to the councillor, it is something that we'll absolutely track. We were challenged with COVID traffic patterns over the past couple of years. For about a year of our pilot, although we did delay our data collection on speed and volume until after COVID traffic patterns were impacted. So we don't have a really great sense of collisions. However, what we can say is that the severity or the likelihood of somebody being involved in a fatal accident, a pedestrian, that is reduced from a 15% survival rate is increased to 70% if somebody is hit by a car traveling at 40 versus 50. So while we don't have collision stats right now, it is something we'll track, but we do know that the severity of collisions goes way down with lower speed limits. And I just got a message, there was a 28% reduction in collisions involving pedestrians in Toronto through their ongoing studies.
I'm in Kitchener. I'm in Waterloo region.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola.
Wait, I have one more question. Come on.
Okay, hurry up, please.
Yeah, well, hurry staff up, too. I want to, my final question, and then I'll have a comment afterwards, but I'll line up for that. Do you really think that speeding can be eliminated?
Through the chair, I think I'll take this one. So can speeding be eliminated? It's an age-old question. I think what we're trying to do here is change driver behavior. And so what we can do as traffic professionals is try to change and address driver behavior in an effort to reduce speeding, in an effort to reduce collisions. And that's what the motive is behind this report.
Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. That's a good answer, because it's not speeding, it's driver behavior. How do we change driver behavior? And will signs do that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Singh, are you off, or are you in?
No, I'm in.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. And I don't know, my initial comment's going to be a little bit of pun-laden for transportation, but I mean, this couldn't be happening fast enough. And but I do appreciate that's going to be a long road ahead. From your earlier comment to Councillor Gazzola's question about can speeding be eliminated, we are trying to achieve the impossible, but I think it's going to happen with a lot of hard work, and with that, there's some cost that comes with it. So my question is further to previous comments and questions from other members of council regarding the advocacy with the province. It surprises me as well that the current legislation. It's quite outdated, and the consultation was 15 years ago, or based on 15 years ago. I mean, our communities have changed significantly. The way we design our communities has changed significantly since then. So it would only make sense that we should be advocating for that change. Now, Mr. Cronkite, I want to push back on your response that this would delay. Why can't it go congruent? Why can't we proceed? And I agree with the staff approach, and I compliment you guys that you're doing it over 3 years, because we want to get this right. There could be some changes to legislation as well as technology that we can implement throughout the process instead of rushing too fast as well. Why can't we do it concurrent, apply for that advocacy while still proceeding forward with the recommendations of this report? And before you answer, I understand there could be a cost if the province were to listen to us and make a change all of a sudden. But you know what? There's always a cost to do the right thing, and this is a cost worth paying for if we end up making the sign changes and there's a change by the legislation later that may not require as many of the sign changes that we would implement otherwise. So if you could answer that.
Sure, through the chair. It's about understanding what the advocacy is for. So what I heard from previous council that brought up the issue was the cost of implementing the program as you see before you. So in order to reduce that cost, you need to reduce the number of signs. And so that's the advocacy piece that we heard about. So in order to reduce the number of signs, you can do that advocacy piece, but from an economic perspective, you don't save on the cost of the signs if we move these congruently, because we would have to go with the program that you see before you as you see before you. So if we do it congruently, the cost remains the same, and staff are completely comfortable in continuing that advocacy that we're doing already. However, if council's direction is to delay the project in an effort to do that advocacy and to see potential the financial benefits of reducing the number of signs, it's two very different approaches. So in terms of my previous comment, Councillor Singh, it's really about whether or not council wants to delay the project to see if there's an economic benefit to doing so. But in reality, to highlight what we've heard today, the information collecting was 10 to 15 years ago, but the legislation wasn't created until late 2018. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the advocacy as well, is oftentimes that advocacy and change takes a little bit longer at the provincial level.
Yeah, so and that's why and thank you for that clarification. I think that helps, because I think everyone, some of the comments made earlier would take that in a different way. And the way I heard it is, I think it would just help us if the legislation was more clear, not necessarily just a reduction to the cost of signage, but a better educational understanding by the motorists as well. If there's clarity that, you know, on all residential streets in Ontario, it's 40 as opposed to 50, unless stated otherwise. And I think that's a better course to take, as most communities are going in this avenue and reducing speed limits in their residential streets. The other question I had was regarding, you know, I mentioned earlier about, you know, technology hopefully helping to benefit in, you know, reducing speeds as well as making roads safer. As we have the emerging autonomous driving tech, by helping lowering the street speed limits, would this, you know, further support that? Where, you know, when we have autonomous vehicles, when they're adhering to lower speeds, we're automatically going to have safer roads accordingly, because again, speeds would be set up much lower than the 50 currently. So we're kind of safe proofing for the future as well. I mean, this is something that wasn't discussed in the report, but I think it's an important point to bring, because that technology is not too far along the horizon.
Through the chair to the councillor, we do get updates from the province regularly about where they're at with autonomous vehicle legislation. From what we're hearing, it's likely further out than some people may hope. And a lot of it relates to consistency of technology from one manufacturer to another, how the code is written for that technology, what the streets look like. For example, autonomous vehicles can have issues through construction zones. You know, having said that, we can continue to advocate with MTO staff and request updates on where legislation's at. Through Vision Zero, we do have an action item to advocate to the province for increased fines for driving infractions. And another councillor mentioned an idea about increasing safety features on vehicles. Even if it's not fully autonomous, there's a lot of other great features currently available. So that's something that we can certainly look at through Vision Zero.
Okay, I encourage that. One more question. Currently, how many? Yeah, sorry. I'll try to be quicker and I'll try to make my comments less. Currently, how many streets do we have overall that are in line for speed calming? Last I heard, it was like 200 something, but.
Through the chair, our priority list has approximately 180 streets.
180 streets. So would most of those 180 streets then would likely fall in that residential streets where the speed limit would be then now going forward 40?
Through the chair, the priority list is based on requests that we get. There are minimum thresholds that we need to see before a street is warranted for formal traffic calming. There needs to be a minimum speed and a minimum volume, for example. However, most of those streets, although I haven't gone through every single one, but I would venture to say that at least 90% or even more are within the speed limit areas that we're proposing.
Okay, so that's excellent. So my question is, I know this would be a bit added cost because we're going to have signage along those streets anyways. And the speed reduction would affect 90% of those 180 streets. If there was an added cost to having the center median, like the median deflectors, those larger signs that says 40 kilometers an hour on all those 180 streets, or the 90% of those that would have the speed reduction, what would that added cost be?
Through the chair, I don't know that we would be able to give you an added cost off the top of our head. What I would do with this one is likely refer it to Vision Zero. So again, I see this as a standalone exercise in terms of whether or not we move forward with a reduced speed limit. And then to Councillor Singh's point about additional seasonal traffic calming measures, that's something that I believe will be discussed or should be discussed as part of the Vision Zero program.
So I know staff, it's fairly easy information to know what per sign installation, what that cost is. We've gone through that exercise. I'm not going to put it to staff to answer that question now. It would be unfair. But for the council meeting, if in between that time, if that could be circulated back of what, you know, we're essentially talking about the beginning of the street and the end of the street, what those sign costs would be. So 2 costs per that 180 streets. And that way we can have a more holistic discussion as part of council, because I really see this as an approach of hitting a big part of those priority streets where they're in that list, but it's going to take a very long time for the streets that are, you know, down on the list But again, for those residents living on those streets, speeding is a serious concern, and we continue to hear them. And with the speed reduction, if we can be more impactful through signage and having some, slow speed calming measures like the deflector signs that say the speed reductions limit, I think this could be a huge win all around. So having that extra information, I think would serve us well when we're having that wider discussion. So if staff could help provide that, I don't know if you require direction on that. I think it's simple enough information, but let me know if you do.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Singh. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I actually just wanted to close the loop, or at least close my understanding of the loop on the sign issue. Councillor Schneider, the mayor, Councillor Johnson all touched upon it. And I just wanted to get staff's understanding. It doesn't make logical sense to me, despite the act that we're bound by. And again, I know there's the joke that everyone with the driver's license thinks they're a traffic engineer, so I'm trying not to be that guy. But does it make logical sense to staff to have a 40-kilometer ends at the end of the street?
For the chair, there needs to be at least one of two things. Either the community zone ends sign, the 40-kilometer-an-hour community zone ends, and or the 60-kilometer-an-hour sign or 50-kilometer-an-hour sign, whatever it might be, on the adjacent street, so that you know that you're going from one speed to the other. Do you need both? That's the part where one could argue that you don't need both signs, but you definitely need one, because you need to be able to trigger the difference.
Okay, so but the worst case scenario, even if you don't have either, worst case scenario, since we're talking about 40-kilometer-an-hour, is someone would be traveling under the speed limit, never over.
That's correct.
Okay, so again, just to be clear then, and again, this isn't your act, but does it make logical sense to you to have that?
Through the chair, speaking to the advocacy piece, if I were given a choice, I would have rather seen the 40-kilometer-an-hour unless otherwise posted sign to be more appropriate. However, we're bound by legislation.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I know it's tough to pass with the chain, but I mean, I wanted to know so that council's on the same page. So next question then. So am I correct in assuming, so the budget for the signage portion is like close to $500,000. So would I be correct in assuming $250,000 of that is for 40-kilometer-an-hour ends signs, or close to that?
Through the chair to the councillor, approximately 450,000 is for signage, and that is for new signs as well as removing some old signs. And the majority of that cost is for the new exit or ends and begin signs. So yeah, you're probably about right to estimate that.
Okay, so then just to close the loop on this then, could we then, if we're going to go through this and do the advocacy, and being that it's going to be 2 to 3 years, why wouldn't we do the advocacy, structure everything, putting in the 40 kilometers begin sign, which we can all agree makes a whole lot of sense, and defer the 40 kilometers end sign to the end of this 2 to 3 year time? We saved $250,000.
Through the chair, part of the issue there would be whether or not the speed limit would be enforceable on the arterials at that point. And you'd also end up with a situation where if you did have compliance for drivers on the minor street and turned onto the major street at 40 kilometers an hour, and that street was 60 kilometers an hour operating speed as an example, there's a big difference in speeds on those that would be already on the street from vehicles that were coming from the side streets. So in terms of approach, it really needs to be cohesive in terms of the messaging to make it as safe as possible. So I wouldn't recommend leaving the 40 kilometer an hour neighborhood end sign off until the end. I think that poses other safety issues and considerations that we really haven't spent enough time thinking about.
Okay, I'll consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. And now the full house, Councillor Marsh.
I caved to the pressure, but
That's okay.
I had another question come up. So I'm curious about or first of all, just to piggyback on the most recent discussion about the signage, I agree with Councillor Davies' idea that we can just delay that signage. And if we have specific situations where a regional road is quite a lot different in speed of traffic, then we can just work with our regional partners to make sure there's a posted speed sign on their road. I'm not going to suggest that we just go completely rogue and make up our own signs and direct staff to not go with legislation, but it's tempting because I'll say that residents are looking for local solutions that are based out of decisions that make a lot of sense. And right now, the signage rules that have been put in place by the province are out of date, and they unfortunately they're going to need to be overhauled again, and they'll be overhauled after we've spent our $500,000 on all these signs, which is really not the best use of our money. My question, though, is regarding the policy that we have with Complete Streets to design our roads to be drivable at 10 kilometers over the speed limit. So can I just ask staff to confirm when we start posting when we start having 40 kilometer an hour signage up on all of our neighborhood streets, does that mean that it will kickstart a change in how all of our neighborhood streets are then designed once they are, up for replacement? Will that for sure kickstart a design change?
Through the chair, so I want to reiterate that if we deviate from what is provincially legislated for signing is that we're going to make it unenforceable. So as soon as you step away from what is provincially legislated, we'll no longer be able to enforce speed limits in our residential areas. And that's a very major safety concern for me. So again, I wouldn't recommend council going in that direction. In terms of roadway design, as I mentioned earlier, Complete Streets was really the catalyst for that, Councillor Marsh. That's what is dictating street design, and through that process, we've tried to ensure that designs will make our streets as safe and as slow as possible.
Yeah. So can you clarify what kickstarts a neighborhood street? Let's say we have a neighborhood street slated for redevelopment in a couple years, but they don't get their 40 kilometer sign until 3 years down the road. Does that mean that it will be designed to be comfortable to drive at 60 kilometers an hour, or are we looking at trying to implement our Complete Streets policies, assuming the 40 kilometer an hour speed limit will be posted within the next 3 years?
Through the chair, Complete Streets would dictate what that operating speed should look like. So it wouldn't be based on the posted speed, but rather the operating speed that's indicated in Complete Streets. So for a residential street, as an example, that operating speed is intended to be somewhere between 40 and 50 kilometers an hour. So it would be the latter. Whether or not the speed limit is posted at 40, the design would be a reflection of that.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, your point is well taken. We need to make sure that our speeds are enforceable, but I am interested in that idea of having 40 kilometer an hour signs within our neighborhoods, but not right away putting up the signs that say this ends, because if people are speeding on a regional roadway above the 50 kilometers an hour, then that's enforceable. That is enforceable for them. It's just that, anyway, I'm not going to argue. I just really I find it very frustrating the way that the political system is causing us to not be able to do what we know residents need in our community.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Urbanovic.
Thanks, Chair Anitis. 4 quick points. Just building on the question that Councillor Johnson raised early on, not about neighborhood gateways, but municipal gateways. I understand that we can't put a sign up that says anything other than all streets are 50 kilometers, other than, unless otherwise posted. But is there anything preventing us from putting a separate sign up along those lines, along the lines of, keep our kids safe, slow down to 40K in our neighborhoods? Is that something we could look at in terms of municipal gateways?
Through the chair, that wouldn't be a legislative sign. That would be something that we could certainly look into. It would be rather unique, but there would be nothing to preclude us from doing that.
Okay, so and I know I've seen that in a few other smaller city municipal gateways, so it might be something we want to take a look at. Secondly, on the school zones, I understand they're going to go to 30. In a number of municipalities, the school zone speed only applies during school hours or on school days. In fact, that tends to be more the norm as opposed to 24/7. If we're going to need to make that change anyway, is there anything is that something that we should take a look at doing here?
Through the chair, I would recommend that school zones remain at 30, primarily because with every school at this point, there's programming after hours, there's playgrounds. And so part of what we envision in Vision Zero is targeting 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limits in areas where we see the most vulnerable road users. So again, that would be around schools, particularly in off hours when you have children running around using the playgrounds and the other facilities that are there.
Okay, appreciate that input. On the issue of 30 kilometers, when Waterloo recently dealt with this, was there not some talk by them of going from 40 to 30, which I think may be probably a step too far in terms of what people would be willing to accept, but is that part of the issue in terms of where other cities are at?
Through the chair, that the speed limit in Waterloo was a discussion by their council. Their council did direct staff to review whether or not 30-kilometer-an-hour neighborhood areas made sense rather than 40-kilometer-an-hour neighborhood areas. I can tell you that their pilot information is very similar to ours, and at least from a staff level, I would say that we're on the same page. I feel that if you sign the neighborhood areas at 30, you lose the ability to differentiate between a regular street and those that carry more vulnerable users. And so again, I think that we have the right approach here.
Okay. On the issue that people have been asking about entrance signs and exit signs in terms of going from 50 to 40 and then 40 back to 50 or 60. I hear your point around the exit signs, but as long as it's signed 40, that fulfills our legal obligation in terms of, any enforcement that would have people going more than 40. If we don't have that other sign, as Councillor Davies said, it really is just potentially having people go slower on the regional roads. But that's not a problem in terms of ticket enforcement, because people are going small. Like the only time that's an issue is you can't give a ticket for someone going too fast if there's no sign telling them that they're going too fast.
For the chair, the neighborhood areas are defined by those signs. So if we don't install all the signs as per the Highway Traffic Act and provincial legislation, then that entire area that we've signed as 40 kilometers an hour will in all likelihood be unenforceable. So we would be creating entire pockets of communities by not installing those signs that would be unenforceable. And at the same time, keeping in mind that, from an economy of scale perspective, operation staff would already be at that intersection installing a
Sure.
never begin sign. So, you know, we're not, there's little efficiency to be saved there in terms of economic benefit as well. So those are, you know, the two primary components that I focus on here. And my main concern with this is making sure that the entire community is still enforceable when we do this.
Okay, no, and that's very legit. You know, I certainly am prepared to add this to the list of things we regularly discuss with our local MPPs when we meet with them, and so I'm happy to add this, you know, regardless as an item of concern. The last point I'm just going to make is that from a capital point of view, when it does come to capital budget, it will be looking to understand the impact of going from 3-year to 2-year, and how we might be able to do that. So I'll leave it at that. And other just, if I can briefly, Councillor Ioannidis, you don't need to come back to me from a comment point of view. Really pleased that this is coming. I think is clearly by the interest of council, you can tell that this is a high priority. This is a priority for our residents. And I think we need to move forward with it as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Singer, are you back in because you were booted out, and then is that why your hand's up?
No, Councillor Ioannidis, it was just for comments.
Okay, and Councillor Gazzola, you're starting comments or questions?
I have a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'll start off by saying I want to thank staff for the work they've done. We have a tremendous staff. I respect them very much. I often disagree with them, but I do have the greatest respect for them. They know what they're talking about. They know much more than I do. But now in this particular case, I'm going to not so much disagree with them, but disagree with the direction we're moving in. You know, our roads are built for higher speeds. Our cars are getting faster. The study that we did on those 3 sections, I really didn't see a great deal of improvement. If I look at the speeding is greater now than it was before the study. Previous speeds at the 85th percentile were 10 to 12% over the speed limit. After we changed that, the speeds were 30 to 35% over the speed limit. I'm really questioning whether we accomplished a great deal in those 3 test areas. It all comes down to me, it's all in driver attitudes. That's where the problems are. And we can fiddle with signs and all of that. You know, we have, when you get into a separate area, everyone in that area is very concerned about speeding. It's a big topic. But it seems those people, when they go out of their own area, they must be speeding, because we have this problem all over the city. It's a problem that they're concerned about when it's in their own backyard. But it seems I'm no better than anyone else. But when we get out away from our own area, we seem to want to open up the speed. So it's all driver attitude, and that's where I believe we have to start changing things. What we're doing here is, I don't see it. It's not. Is it enforceable? I don't see it being enforced. So I'm not prepared to support $500,000 to get into something that we really can't enforce. I'm prepared to spend whatever is required, but maybe we need to put those speeding locations, spend money on doing that. If we change the speed limit, what good is it if we don't enforce it? Will it really happen? No, it's the driver's attitudes that we have to deal with. we have to, before we do anything else, the other thing, before we do anything else, we have to get the provincial legislation lined up to where we want to go. There are a lot of things we run into because of the provincial legislation. So I'm prepared to support spending dollars. It's wise money to be spent, but not in this direction. So I won't be supporting the recommendation that's before us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The way I see this is that the space in front of your home should not be considered unsafe. And the sad reality is that many residents in Kitchener feel exactly that way, where their kids can't be left outside because of worry about speeding on their roadway. If someone chooses to live on a collector roadway or major arterial roadway, they're pretty well aware that there's going to be speeding on that roadway, but that's not the case in a residential street. I think 40 kilometers an hour is the right speed. It's about expecting better of our motorists, and slower speed, I think, sets that responsible speed limit and ensures safety for our residents. Yes, it comes at a cost, but again, how can you put a price onto public safety? During my time in council, I think the most I've ever heard in public complaint has always been about safety of their roadways and about speeding. So we've been asking our staff to look for other ways to go beyond very limited speed calming measures, again, because that too comes at a significant cost, and do something more substantive that ensures safety throughout our city. This does exactly that. This report is data driven. It's through collected information that shows that lowering the speed limit ensures safety. It reduces chance of bodily harm. And how can we argue against that data, against that information that staff have at hand? I'm supportive of the approach. I agree that it has to go in congruent with advocacy with the province. This should be mandated across the province. On residential streets, speed limits should be lowered. It should be at that 40. It should not come at huge cost of having to change speed signs everywhere. But if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do, because it's a responsible thing to do. And I'm quite supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. Councillor Singh summed it up so well. I want to really thank staff for the excellent work on this. I know they are my most frequently emailed members of staff and always come through and always so helpful. But you know, the safety is something that I think we all on council here value, and lowering the speed limit will bring that. I love what I'm hearing about. Let's be connecting with the province about changing some of these regulations. I mean, 50 used to be the standard for a speed limit on residential streets. We're among one of many municipalities who are looking to change that. So the language needs to change. I would like to see the need for those 40K speed limit ends signs to be done. I think that would save us a lot of money on those signs right there. But this will bring great value to our city and our residents and improve the safety of our streets and our neighborhoods. And I think that's something we all want. So can't wait to support this and happy to move it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. And again, I want to say thank you so much to staff. And I think as you heard today, we asked you every kind of question that would take us in the direction of us not having to put up all those signs and not having to spend the money on all those signs. And we know that what you're doing is you're basically saying here's what the Highway Traffic Act says that we have to do. So I just want you to know that we absolutely appreciate all the work that you've done on this. Our questions aren't about what you're having to say. It's just we're trying to find a way frankly, to not have to spend money on something that we feel doesn't make sense. We'd rather be putting the money that we will end up spending on this into other kinds of traffic calming. And I feel like you feel the same way as well. So I just want to be really clear about this. But what we're dealing with here is kind of a chicken and egg issue. Councillor Gazzola was saying that, he's not prepared to support this because he doesn't want to spend the money. And I think we all agree we don't want to spend that money either. No, you don't want to spend the money if it didn't result in the lowering of speeds. And I think many of us feel that same way as well. But I think that what here, what staff is bringing forward here really goes with what we're looking at doing in the future around Vision Zero. And it will be kind of that complete package of, this is part of the education piece by having the signage up that does talk about what the speeds are. Will go a long way towards people really thinking about how fast they're driving through our communities, and reinforce that we need to all take our right foot off and be more cognizant of what we're doing as motorists when we're driving. So again, thank you to staff for putting this forward, and I am happy to support it as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola, your name was mentioned. Do you want a clarification on something?
Yes, I want to make it very, very clear, and I did. I thought, and when I spoke, I'm not opposed to spending the money. I said spend twice the money. I'm saying that I didn't find the results from our test were that spectacular. I have no idea from what was provided as to what it did in terms of safety, in terms of reducing collisions and fatalities and what have you. There's no information on that, and I'm fully aware that speeding is one of our biggest problems in the community. And as I said, it's when people are in their own neighborhood, they're very concerned about it, but those same people, when they drive out into other neighborhoods, seem to forget it. So I'm not opposed to spending the money. And as I said twice, I'm opposed to going in this direction.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. I'm not going to reiterate what the other councillors have said. Everybody said it very well. I, of course, will support this. And I just want to add that I think that what we're doing today is just showing our support for all the traffic calming neighborhood groups that are out there, all the citizens that are out there, fighting every day to keep their kids safe on their street. They're at the schools. We've had we had a group out in Dune South that had a cartoon character guy dressed up last year, just raising awareness for safety on the street. So I'm really proud of this council that we're going to support this today. I appreciate staff doing all the work that they've done for this. Is it going to solve everything? Like Councillor Gazzola says, is it going to slow everybody down? Probably not, but it's a step in the right direction. We've got a long way to go. I look forward to Vision Zero, that report coming out, and I look forward to seeing more traffic cameras at schools or in the hot spots of the region. There's lots to be done, but this is absolutely the step in the right direction, and I think it's a real lift for all the citizens out there that are working hard to do what we're trying to do too. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Michaud. I think you have the right idea there. I think we should hire the Avengers to come in and take control of their speeding issue. But anyways, yeah, it's obvious that this is definitely the number one issue that we've dealt with as members of council, and now this is going on almost 2 hours with this issue, I can't, like I mentioned earlier, there's not really a tool that can really solve all the issues. But I think one tool that I think we haven't really mentioned too much with all the questions that we raised with staff was the community engagement plan. And what I see in that is, I think it's really, really well done from what I see. Social media posts on city accounts, geo-targeted posts in neighborhoods, pamphlets and posters at city facilities, direct mailing to residents within the projected areas, notifications sent home with students from schools, which I think is a really big one, because those are the real folks that we're really trying to target. So I think that's kudos to the staff for looking at, and then web page information and updates on ongoing feedback. So I think, you know, if anything, maybe we could probably spend a little bit more on an engagement plan. You know, it is what it is, and we got to do it. We got to do what we got to do to keep our neighborhood safe. And it's been moved by Councillor Schneider. All those in favor? Opposed? One opposed. Okay, thank you. We will move on to our second item, which is dealing with item 3.2, the additional staff for proactive sidewalk enforcement. And there isn't a presentation that I see, so do we have anyone interested in moving this item? Councillor Davey? Okay, any questions? Okay, Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I'm trying to find my questions. I was wondering if staff can tell me on a cost and revenue basis, from adding the 4 staff last year, is it possible to tell me what was the net cost to the community, to the city? Because we added staff, but we also collected revenues when we enforced our rules. So I'm just wondering is it even possible that we broke even from doing that? Is there a way that staff can respond to
that? Through the chair, I don't have that information available, but that's certainly something that we can see if it's feasible to pull that together and to share that with council.
Yeah, that would be fine. This comes back in 2 weeks. I think the council. I would just be curious to know, and I'm even expecting that in a final analysis by that proactivity that it really didn't cost the taxpayers of the community that much, that the people that didn't obey the rules paid the cost. So if we could have that when it comes back to council, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gazzola. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. Gloria, thanks for this report and all the hard work that's being done on this. It looks to me like from the report that this is working, that when the notices are distributed, that residents are clearing, and it seems to be like a more friendly educational approach. Can you maybe just share your thoughts on that, and maybe if there's any stories or responses you've heard from the proactive officers about the kind of reception they received from residents who've received a notice to clear?
Certainly, through the chair. So we are seeing improvement out there, and I think we've seen the numbers dropping. You can see from the charts that I've included that the number of actual violations have dropped. Last year was a bit of an anomaly. We're not really certain why the number of violations that were sent to the contractor increased significantly. There were more people working from home. We would have thought that it would have been a year where people were able to get that done. But it has shown that we're decreasing in terms of the number of violations that we're finding. So that's good news. This is a contentious bylaw. I've said that all along. People get upset when they're left a notice, particularly if they've made an effort at it. So I think what we can anticipate is that, there's kind of two sides to this. There's always the side of mobility and the work that we're trying to do with residents to ensure that they've got safe passage and can get around town. But the downfall of that is that we have to leave somebody a notice, and if they've made an effort, they're not going to be happy with that. So I think the two go hand in hand, and I don't think we're going to be able to avoid that. So we do get a lot of calls and angry people that they've been left notices, but I think as we've rolled out since 2019, when we updated the bylaw, we did do that pamphlet. And I think that gives residents some indication of why it's so important to clear their sidewalk. And we have had some positive feedback from that.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed a bit of a change just from when it first started to past year. Once people understand the reasoning for us, for the clearing and the mobility issues, they tend to want to comply. And are you finding that the number of repeat has gone down a little bit once people like they get a notice and they clear, and I know there'll always be the chronic, but
yeah. And so we have noticed a bit of a downward trend in terms of the repeat and even the chronic repeat. I think I'd put in the report, we had 5 that we were having monitored by the contractor, and we're now down to 1. So if that motivates somebody to do something with that property, then really at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for.
yeah, great. Okay, I just think that the approach, the educational approach has worked out well. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Marsh.
Thanks. Yeah, so Ms. McNeil, can you just help us understand the staff recommendation? If we're referring the decision to the budget process, then wouldn't the opportunity to hire additional staff for this coming snow season be missed?
Through the chair, from a staff perspective, we don't currently have any operating funds to increase of officers that we're hiring. So from our perspective, I think it has to go through the 2022 process in order to, if council supports it, in order to be allocated permanent funding. But we would have to be looking at, if council wants that to be in place for this winter season, we'd have to look at a way to find some funding for at least November and December of this year.
Right. And so I'm surprised that, like, I guess I'm just a little bit not sure about what exactly staff is recommending. Because if staff were to want to see us implement an additional adding 4 additional staff to support an increase in the proactive bylaw inspection program, then wouldn't staff also be recommending that we find funds for the remainder of the 2021 year until we have approved the 2022 budget? And if so, like, then see, what I'm asking is really, I want us to see this happen. And I understand that you would need to start hiring sooner than later. So can you help me understand the recommendation and how we might proceed if we want to make it happen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I can take that one. So staff's recommendation would put a process in place to permanently, on an ongoing annual basis, hire these additional staff. Unfortunately, because of the timing of the budget, we wouldn't be able to hire people for this November and December, and would have to wait until next year. And so my suggestion is, if council is interested in having these staff hired on an additional basis starting this year, then you would want to give us direction to identify another one-time funding source for this year, or to run an operational deficit. I'm not sure if Mr. Lockenbach can provide some suggestions on one-time funding sources, but it would require an amendment to the recommendation.
Thanks, that makes sense to me. So yeah, sorry, Mr. Lottenbach, I see you.
So through the chair, if council is interested in moving ahead in advance of the budget process, then it would either be to try to find savings within the area that would support it, or alternatively, we would likely look to the winter maintenance reserve to fund if there is any costs from the November-December timeframe. And then obviously the permanent budget ask would be considered through the budget process.
Thank you. So that's what I thought. So Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the recommendation with the amendment that we direct staff to find a one-time funding source for the remainder of this year, so that we can hire those additional people for this year.
Okay, that's fine. We'll take that when the time comes. Okay, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm supportive of this direction. I think it only makes sense. Alternatively, it would be to mandate either snow clearing of our sidewalks with the city, and we've already gone through that discussion and the cost that comes with it. And the direction that this council took is that we're going to continue on partnering with our homeowners in working in that responsibility of having safe sidewalks in the winter time. And with that requires enforcement to ensure that everyone abides by that responsibility. So we need that workforce to be able to ensure that the streets are cleared on a timely manner. My question to you, Gloria, is on top of the staffing cost, are we looking at technologies as well, like snow depth sensors, and they are out there? That way they can, be more efficient of our staff, ensure that we can, enforce a wider area and get a better benefit from that increased staffing, and ensure that, we have, a better enforcement of our sidewalks.
Through the chair, we're always looking at ways to improve with technology. So I know we internally within our division, we've looked at going to an electronic system. We used to handwrite notices that we left. So that has improved, the amount of area that we can get covered. In terms of snow sensors, that's not something that I'm familiar with, but that's certainly something that I can maybe work with other staff on to see whether that would be an avenue that we can look at.
I think that only makes sense. I've done a little bit of research leading up to this meeting, and there's sensors out there, SHM30, which measure snow depth as far as 10 meters away, and they're used not only for sports fields but also towards highways and rail tracks, so they can measure smaller depths as well. I'll forward you that. I'm sure this is just one technology out there amongst many other products. I only bring this to your attention because I think we just can make sure that we have better efficiency of the increased staff in ensuring that we have wider area that can be covered rather than just doing it more manual than manual method. And again, at the end of the day, the extra cost is a cost, but if you can get more out of it, then it's a win-win. And definitely at the end of the day, what we want is better enforcement and ensuring that people are abiding by the bylaw. So I'll forward to you the information I have, but again, if staff can look at that, I would really appreciate it. I don't think a direction is really required. I would hope that you would have that, that consideration on your own. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Singh. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. This is a great report. And Gloria, I have a question. When was the last time that you've got hired new staff for bylaw and for something like this?
So we
or
did
in general,
hire,
actually, I'd be curious to know in general.
This is a little bit different because these are not permanent staff. They're only temporary staff that are brought in for 5 months to do this program. So that was brought in through that whole snow review that was done. And we were allotted those permanent positions 2019. So in regards to that, I just think these will be more temporary positions. They won't be permanent. But we did a review. We did gain a property standards audit a year ago. So we did do a review at that point. But it's been a while since we've done an entire divisional review.
Mm-hmm. Like how many years?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well then I won't push any more for that. I support this, and I would support more staff in bylaw anyways, because I think the city has grown exponentially. Again, I've said this before today, and I guess we have to find the money somewhere, but I think that you could use some more support too. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Michaud. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ioannidis, and thank you for this report. I am in support of a proactive approach to snow removal. What I was surprised about this report, and I know because we're going at it from a different angle, but I was surprised that we didn't include some information. And perhaps this is coming up whenever we do budget time, but around the neighborhood support program that we had in place for people that needed help their sidewalk cleared. I know that Councillor Schneider had put through in the previous year's budget about increasing the amount of money to go into that fund. I supported that as well. I had a lot of seniors in my ward who speak of that. I want to ensure that we continue to look at that piece and providing support to people that need that help in terms of clearing their property. It would have been, I don't see Mr. Lobley on the phone, or sorry, on screen right now to be able to help answer those questions, but maybe Ms. McNeil, you have some idea about how many of those were used, if we need to be putting more money into that, or kind of where that program stands.
Through the chair, oh, sorry, Denise, if you know the answer to that.
So through the chair, in terms of the assisted services piece, we are actively gearing up for this year's season. As council recalls, there was an annual increase of 75 spots until we hit full capacity in terms of use of the program. And so the intended increase is moving forward this year. And there is some uncertainty about the ability of the working center to be able to deliver with the increased capacity. So we're also sourcing other opportunities to perform that work.
Okay, so 75 more spots will be in place for this year. I'm just wondering if we maxed out last year. And again, Ms. McGoldrick, you might not know that. That was kind of a surprise question, but yeah, if it's something that we make sure that is part of our budget conversations and that we have those numbers in place would be appreciated. I think we can't, to me, we can't do this without also offering some help for people that really need it as well.
So through the chair, perhaps I'll just respond to the question about last year. I do know that we had a very strong uptake. We had also set aside some spots associated with the proactive bylaw enforcement, and then later in the season had filled those spots. And so we do believe there is demand for additional spots within the service. And keep in mind that you know, communication in terms of the service is also a key, you know, a key driver in terms of the need. And so the communication plan is certainly another element that we're working on.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Johnston. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this report. I just had a question about the 4 full-time temporary employees that are hired every year. Do any of them, like, is there a possibility to convert those into full-time permanent positions that maybe in the summer they're helping out in the parks or doing other sorts of work for the city? You know, I mean, I think if we can hire full-time people, it's always better than temporary positions. So I was just wondering what thought is being put into that.
Through the chair, that's not something that we have looked at. I know when we do post for these positions, we do look for specific training and background, particularly in dealing with confrontation, difficult people, which is sometimes not always the same sort of requirements that are required for other positions within the corporation. So I'm not, if there's you know, some opportunity to do that, we're certainly open to that. But we just, again, this often becomes a very contentious bylaw, and we have to ensure that people are prepared and have the experience to deal with people when they're difficult and irate.
So if I'm understanding this properly, we would actually have 8 full-time temporary employees just looking at snow removal. Is that correct?
They would be proactively walking the sidewalks and dealing with any violations that they found.
And how many other bylaw officers do we have, full-time or part-time? What's the distribution there? Like that are year-round permanent or possibly temporary?
So we have 10 part-time staff in bylaw, and we have, I believe, 30 full-time staff.
Wow, and that's without counting these 8.
Right. Now, mind you, they all have different duties. So, you know, the reactive program is where we pull from existing staff. So the property standards officers, for example, if we're inundated with a lot of complaints, we will pull them from their duties and they will only deal with emergency, like no heat or water type complaints in order till we get caught up with snow complaints. But each of those other officers have assigned duties. So we're taking them away from those duties in order to do snow and ice.
And do their duties in the winter, are they lower or fewer demands on them? Like
Generally not.
No. Would it be possible to get more of a breakdown of all of these officers, and without naming people, but just sort of an overview of what the duties are and responsibilities, just so we can sort of get a better sense of the need?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it would be helpful if Ms. McNeil took this offline with Councillor Chapman and could certainly sit down and provide her with lots of detail on the makeup of bylaw enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have no further questions. I have a question, Ms. McNeil, and it's the one that you talked about earlier in your report, and it's about having some of those residents that feel like they've been clearing their snow and they got that notice. Is there any way to have a different type of notice for like to say, we're aware that you at this time such and such, maybe not to be as fully forceful now that we have the program in full swing and we're seeing a lot more enforcement? I'm just wondering if there's a way to tone it down a little bit for those.
I think the challenge with that, Councillor Ioannidis, is that the soft approach requires us to go back yet one more time. So if we go there and we leave, a soft toned letter, and we come back and they haven't done it, then 24 hours has lapsed, and then we have to leave the regular notice, and then we have to come back again. So that's where we're running into challenges with taking that approach. The other piece of it is that we always, in order to make things enforceable, we have to lay out what the bylaw is, what the expectation is, and what the consequence is. And it's generally the consequence that people have an issue with, right? They don't want to read that they could be fined. But if we don't outline that, then we don't have the ability to collect. So, I appreciate that there are some other strategies. But the challenge that we often find too is that we're just dealing with what we see at the time that we're there. So somebody may have cleared their sidewalk, but there's a large section of ice, which is a safety issue. So we don't know how long that's been there. We're just seeing it when we're arriving. So we have to leave them some sort of notification on that. So, although I appreciate the fact that people get upset, we knock at every door when we're out, and we try to have that conversation with residents that we're able to directly show them what the concern is. If somebody's not home is when we have to leave that notice. So I'm not sure if there's a way around that without actually increasing the workload and having staff circle back several times.
Okay, maybe there's a solution there, but you're right. It's definitely a challenging for sure from what you're telling me. Anyways, Councillor Marsh, you have a follow-up?
I just want to thank you for bringing that up, because I too think that our approach doesn't really align with our general approach as a city when we're trying to interact with residents about things that they need to, do differently. So I think it's a conversation worth having again, even though we've had that conversation annually. It's perhaps something we can try to get more creative about. When I say creative, I just mean, that's the wrong word. Let's just try to see what other solutions we might be able to come up with. So I just have an additional question though. What are we doing about our annual contentious conversations about city-led sidewalk snow clearing? Is that not on the table this year, or is that coming back to us later this year yet?
I guess Ms. McNeil.
Through the chair, it's my understanding, and I'll let Ms. McGoldrick speak to that, that had been decided.
Hot potato.
Through the chair, in 2019, council made the decision to move forward with the existing approach in terms of the shared responsibility, with the additional supports around the proactive bylaw and the assisted services. So there isn't an intent at this point. We don't have direction to evaluate pilots or take a different service model approach. We are still in the midst of implementing council's direction through the phase-in of the assisted services spots and through the direction last year of council for Ms. McNeil to bring forward this report to enhance the proactive bylaw enforcement. So there is no intent to bring forward, at this point, we don't have a plan, additional models that we're looking at.
Okay, so a follow-up just to ask, so in previous years, when we've discussed this topic, it was always sort of mentioned that we anticipate the province to come forward with additional legislation that requires us to be more firm and more proactive, that might lead us towards city-led sidewalk snow clearing. Can you help understand where that's at?
So through the chair, Councillor Marsh, you're referring to the minimum maintenance standards and the enhancement around active transportation. And I can't recall what year, it was likely 2018 or 2019 in which those changes were made to the Municipal Act and the minimum maintenance standards. And so through that was incorporated into the review of the pilot options. And it was determined that, you know, the approaches that we were piloting, any of them can meet the minimum maintenance standard, and to that very point, that's why the proactive bylaw enforcement was one of the options on the table, because we need to demonstrate that we have a system of inspection associated with our sidewalks, and so we are meeting. We are meeting the intent of the legislative changes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have no further questions and I don't see anyone else. All those in favor, moved by Councillor Davey. Opposed?
Wait, sorry, point of information, isn't it?
Oh, sorry, you're right.
I moved it.
Your
It's
amendment.
an amendment.
Your
So,
amendment, sorry,
yeah.
you're right. Sorry about that. We will go start off with your amendment, which is to deal with move the amendment, direct staff to have a one-time funding source for this coming winter season. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And now back to the other motion. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just ask you, sorry, very quickly, the point that I had raised about, using sensors and technology, will staff look at that and seeing if there is some that can be incorporated and just bring that as part of their issue paper, or would a direction be required for that, for them to look at it?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think it'd be best for us to take this offline. There has been some work done. I think it would be great, Councillor Singh, to sit down with you, look at the materials that you've brought, and then figure out next steps.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And on to our last item. Let me just get to our agenda, and the one that's supposed to take the longest. So dealing with item 3.3, the fire department suppression response time. Staff are reviewing it, and we have a 10-minute presentation. I'm guessing it's a combination of a few of you, right, Chief?
That's correct. There's three of us that'll be speaking. Okay. Well, thank you, Chair Ioannidis, and good afternoon, Mayor Urbanovic and members of council. I'm pleased to be with you today, serving as your fire chief, and to present the findings and recommendations of the Kitchener Fire Department's suppression response time and staffing review. This review has been led through a strong partnership between the fire department's management team and members of the Kitchener Professional Firefighters Association. I'm happy to have Assistant Platoon Chief Patrick O'Halloran, who has been with the KFD for 20 years, the Community Service Department's Manager of Service Improvement and Coordination, Helena Folds, with me today to help present to you key findings of our review. Next slide, please. I joined the Kitchener Fire Department in 1991. Over the past 30 years, I've noticed many things change, but staffing challenges have remained the same. During this time, we have tried to find efficiencies in our operations to avoid adding staff, including relocating all stations in the early 90s, which was intended to reduce response zones and response times. However, we have come to a point where our staffing challenges can no longer be avoided. Over the past 8 years, Kitchener has grown by more than 50,000 residents, and we're not expecting this trend to slow down anytime soon. By the year 2041, Kitchener is expected to have more than 320,000 residents. In addition to the increase in population size, we know that our community is becoming a more dense urban center. Tall building growth is expected to double by the year of 2030. This increase in tall buildings is very important consideration in fire and emergency response because it requires more staff and more equipment to ensure residents are safe in their homes. As the city grows, it also means the fire department needs to be able to provide service to more people. Our call volume has increased by over 58% in the last 8 years, and we expect this trend to continue. Station 2, which is located on Lancaster Street, and is primarily responsible for responding to incidents in the downtown area, is already our busiest station. And we know population in that area is only going to increase as well. Despite this significant growth in the community and the intensification within the downtown core, we actually have fewer fire suppression staff today than we did in 2011. And the number of staff on active duty at any one time has only increased by 1 firefighter since 1991. When I look back on my 30+ years in the fire department, it's amazing to see how our community has changed and grown into a well-developed and thriving city. But as the city grows, pressure on our essential services also grow. Today, the fire department is working harder than ever before with increased pressures, but the same number of resources. I would now like to ask Assistant Platoon Chief Pat O'Halloran to speak to you about our key findings as it relates to the fire department's ability to respond in a timely manner and the increasing number of emergency calls we are receiving.
Thank you, Chief Gilmore. Next slide, please. In 2017, City Council approved a fire master plan, which directed staff to specifically review our response times against what is known as the NFPA 1710 standard. This pie chart shows that on average, between 2016 and 19, the Kitchener Fire Department took longer than the NFPA standard to respond to an emergency call almost half the time, or 43% to be exact. Across the city, our response times are being negatively impacted by the fact that suppression staff have to respond to emergencies outside their designated station area, meaning they are responding to calls further away than they should be. For example, recently suppression staff from Station 5, which is located in the Forest Heights area, were responding to a report of hazardous materials being released. In order to safely and effectively mitigate this emergency, we required what is known as a full response, which includes 15 firefighters, 2 pumps, 1 aerial truck, and a rescue and command unit. While crews were dealing with that first emergency, a confirmed apartment fire was reported in the same station area. However, because crews from Station 5 were already responding to this hazardous materials call, crews from Station 1, which is our fire headquarters, and Station 3, which is located in Stanley Park, dispatched to deal with this apartment fire. In this case, it took 12 minutes for enough firefighters to reach this apartment fire to be able to respond safely and effectively because of the further distances they had to travel to get there. Given the fact that on average a fire doubles every minute, a 12-minute response time is not fast enough. Another example of what happens when stations respond outside of their zones occurred when we received a call for a possible heart attack in Station 5's response area. Station 5 was out on another call, so Station 2, which is near Guelph and Lancaster, had to respond across town, taking over 9 minutes to arrive on scene. Like fire incidents, time is a critical factor when responding to medical emergencies, and the survivability of a heart attack decreases 10% for every minute of delay, meaning a 9-minute response time is not fast enough. Next slide, please. In recent years, 2 reviews have been conducted on the fire department's emergency response capabilities. And I'd like to take a moment to share a couple of specific key findings from those reviews. In 2017, as part of the city's master fire plan, we conducted a specific study to understand how our current staffing and deployment model is impacting our response times. That study found that our fire department can only cover 27% of calls with 14 firefighters on scene within the NFPA response time. That study also found that there's no area of the city where 24 firefighters can respond to a fire in a high-rise building within the NFPA standard response time. This is concerning given that the current and expected growth and high-rise development within our community, especially within the downtown core. In 2019, the Fire Underwriter Survey conducted a review of the Kitchener Fire Department. The Fire Underwriter Survey is an independent organization that provides data on public fire protection and fire insurance gradings and for classification purposes. The Fire Underwriter Survey assessed Kitchener's response capabilities and found that current suppression staffing levels could negatively impact fire insurance within the city of Kitchener if not addressed. Specifically, their report stated, quote, improving response capabilities across the city, along with staffing in both suppression and prevention, would ideally result in the largest impact to our current fire insurance classification, end quote. If no action is taken to address current suppression staffing, our community's fire underwriter score could be negatively impacted, which would have the potential of increasing the insurance rates for property owners throughout the city. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Helena Foltz to walk you through the balance of our presentation. Helena.
Thank you, Pat. Next slide, please. As part of our response time and staffing review, we collected information from 12 Ontario municipalities to better understand how the Kitchener Fire Department ranks when compared to other departments that service communities of a similar size. Comparator cities were selected based on total population, population density, and assessment value that are most like the city of Kitchener. And although they are smaller in terms of population and geographic size, we also included the cities of Guelph, Cambridge, and Waterloo as our regional comparators. This external comparison was used to verify the other information that we collected, which also demonstrates that we do not have adequate suppression staff to protect a community of our size and density. So as you can see on the bar chart on this slide, Kitchener ranks the second lowest for the total number of firefighters per 1,000 people, and is also ranked the lowest among our regional cities. Next slide, please. This slide shows that Kitchener ranks the 4th lowest of all cities and the lowest among regional comparators when evaluating the number of fire stations per 1,000 people. This ranking is also concerning given the rapid growth rate and high level of intensification that's expected over the next 10 to 20 years, especially when several of our existing stations are already operating at more than 2,500 calls per year, which the Fire Underwriter Survey considers to be high volume for any fire station. Next slide. The final slide I would like to review with you includes a recommendation or a summary of staff's recommendations. In order to respond to the significant growth that's occurring within the city, that includes growth in population, tall buildings, and calls for emergency service, and also to help improve response times to fire, rescue, and medical calls, staff recommend the following: to hire 20 new firefighters over the next 4 years, opening a new fire station in 2026, and completing a fire station location study in 2022 to help determine the exact location of that new station. The operating budget impacts of hiring additional suppression staff are highlighted on the screen in front of you and would be phased in over the next 4 years. The capital costs of a new station and associated vehicles are eligible for funding through development charges and would therefore be considered by the current review of our DC bylaw before those costs are worked into the capital budget, which would likely be during the 2023 budget process. And with that, Mr. Chair, staff will turn the floor over to members of City Council for any questions you may have. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Folds. Thank you, Assistant Deputy Chief O'Halloran and Chief Gilmore for your presentation. We have quite a few up for discussion, starting with Councillor Schneider.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Chair Ioannidis. In the presentation, the report, you said we had the second lowest number of firefighters per 1,000 residents of all the Ontario municipalities in that survey. So if we approve staff's recommendation to add the 20 firefighters, where would that put us in comparison to these other fire departments?
Through the chair, Councillor. Something go wrong?
Go ahead, Chief.
Sure. So sorry about that, Helena. So through the chair, Councillor Schneider, the answer is we'd actually move up to 5th lowest, which would still leave us below the median, but would remain the lowest of our direct comparators.
Okay. And it been noted that it's been quite a long time since we added firefighters to our staff, even with our community growth as big as it's been in recent years. So the position we're in right now, what can we do to avoid being in a position like this in coming years and having to hire a good number of firefighters over a short period of time?
Yes, it's a good question. So through you, Mr. Chair, it's actually something that we've talked about on a number of occasions. How do we avoid getting to a place where we've waited so long, we have to hire so many? And we do think it's probably appropriate to put in some regular cycle where we conduct similar response time and staffing reviews as we're presenting to you today. I don't think they'd have to be as large because they wouldn't have to wait as long. But if over several years we can make minor tweaks to the staffing model, I think we can avoid the kind of situation we're in today.
Okay, and just as a comparison, do we know how many staff that police and EMS have added over the past 5-10 years?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we don't have that information at that time, but that's something that we can certainly reach out and we can send that by email to council before the next council date.
Okay, now we see the role of fire suppression staff. So that might lead one to believe that they just put out fires. And I know there's information in the report about the types of calls that they responded to, but could you describe the different duties, the different things that a fire suppression member would respond to and help with?
Through the chair, for sure. So as well as fire suppression, so fires and firefighting, we have technical rescues, which include water rescue, high angle, low angle rescue, confined space. We respond to hazardous materials incidents, obviously car accidents, motor vehicle collisions that include extrication. Obviously, we respond to several medical calls, which include cardiac arrests, vital signs absence, a number of public assistance calls. So picture, a child locked in a car, as well as many, many public education events.
Okay, and we've mentioned the high-rise buildings have been mentioned quite a lot in the report. And they always come with some very strong fire regulations, like they're all equipped with sprinkler systems. Can you maybe explain, what sprinkler systems do and what fire suppression staff would do in the case of a fire at a high-rise building?
Through the chair, believe it or not, in Kitchener, less than 1/3 of our high rises are sprinklered. So up until 2015, it wasn't mandatory. So the new building stock, however, is sprinklered, specifically in the corridors and the parking garages. All units require sprinklers. So best case scenario, if the unit does have a sprinkler, the sprinkler is designed to suppress the fire and contain it. It won't fully extinguish it. So obviously they're cognizant of how much water comes out of sprinkler heads so that the water damage doesn't exceed the fire damage. So the role of the firefighter there is to make entry as quick as possible into the fire unit, because the majority of the time it's the smoke and the off-gassing of the combustion that usually leads to death, and not so much the actual heat from the fire.
Okay, thanks so much.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. A couple questions, if I could. Councillor Schneider touched upon the tall buildings, which I think is important, but just in the broader sense, one of the things that I've heard from the community since over between what the fire department does and EMS does, and we don't really have, I mean, I certainly don't really have a good understanding of where that intersection lies. So are the plans, are we aware, are the plans of the regional government and EMS, are they offsetting, or do we expect them to offset some of the sort of the medical calls that the fire department faces now going forward?
Through the chair, I can't honestly say. The region does reimburse us for supplies used at all medical calls. The reason we have a partnership with them is obviously due to public safety and patient care. The premise is that we can get there a little bit quicker based on the locations of our fire departments. Obviously, we don't have to offload patients in the hospital, which consumes a lot of their time. So like Chief O'Halloran said earlier, the time is about 4 minutes. Otherwise, the outcomes, excuse me, not as favorable.
Okay, so
that answered your question entirely.
We can hardly hear you, Chief.
Yeah, you're a little on the quiet side. I did hear it though. If anyone else needed reiteration, I heard it, but
I heard it too. You are a little, you just your last few sentences, you went low in volume.
Yeah, so
you're good now.
Yes, yeah. So honestly, I don't think maybe you're not really in a position to be able to answer the question, but I think that's something the broader community is looking for in terms of, how do we get there quickest? And it seems like a lot of the calls are more and more EMS related. So that's a discussion that I think we have to have at some point.
Mr. Chair,
yeah.
if I could just add something.
Sure.
You know what I've come to learn over the years is actually our system is exactly designed to have to have fire and ambulance working together. And so it's actually designed exactly so that firefighters often arrive first on scene and provide that preliminary medical support to keep the person alive until the ambulance can get there. Because once the ambulance gets there, they have to go to the hospital, and they can take hours sitting in the hospital waiting for the person to see a doctor. And so that's taking away their resources as opposed to the firefighter. As soon as ambulance gets there, we either go back to the station or go to the next call. So it's exactly designed to work the way it is.
I appreciate that context. Thank you. That's useful. My second question is somewhat related in terms of assistance. So some of us are of the opinion that, whether it's, 4 years or 8 years or 20 years, at some point we're going to be amalgamating with some of our local municipalities. So the question I had, just looking at the chart that was provided by Ms. Folds there in her part of her presentation, it looks like the Waterloo staffing is some 30% more per capita in terms of firefighter than City of Kitchener. So when we're going through this process with respect to that, and actually especially with respect to the fire station location review, will we be looking at that potential down the road amalgamation and how we can work better together?
So through you, Mr. Chair, what I would say is whether, tomorrow or 5 years from now, the two cities were to amalgamate, we'd be making the same recommendation to you today. The reality is there are thousands and thousands of people that have come into this city, hundreds of tall buildings, and we have less staff than we did back in 2011. And so this is about getting our own house in order and responding to the need. So regardless of who responds, we have the demand in our community.
Thank you for that. I thought those were important to ask. Mr. Chair, I'll have a comment as well after. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, my question was asked by Councillor Schneider with regards to the firefighters per 100,000. We're second lowest. And if we move towards staff recommendation, how we would be fifth lowest. Is this really going far enough? Or should we be going further than the hirings that we have said that are outlined in the recommendation?
Through the chair, I think we're going in the right direction. We're very cognizant of how big this ask is, and so that's why it's spread out over the 4 years. However, in 2026, for sure, when the new station opens, because typically what happens historically is the only time we get any more staff with the fire department is on the opening of a new station. So we need to look at maybe 2026 when the station opens at another assessment just to see how many firefighters we need at that point.
Okay, and then my second question is with regards to, it's the same question, but with regards to the fire stations and the per 100 or per 1,000 person. We're at the fourth lowest now. If we did put in another station, where would that put us on the graph?
Through the chair, I don't have that information handy, but I'm happy to do that calculation and provide that answer to you by email.
That's fine. It's not by any stretch of the imagination. Those are all my questions. I'm more than happy to move the recommendation if it hasn't already been moved.
It has been moved by yourself. Thank you, Councillor Galloway. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis, and thank you to the fire team for being here today to give us this report. I want to personally thank you for recently there was a big fire in Ward 8, and within days of it was in an apartment building. Within days of that fire, I know that your staff was on hand to do educational work on the street with other apartments, talking to people about how to escape a fire in an apartment building, and really doing some excellent outreach and support with fire safety and things that people don't normally think about. And I'm very, very thankful for your support and what happened there. I'm wondering if maybe you can comment on some of the things that maybe you would like to do more of whenever you have more staff in place, the things that you would really like to do in terms of outreach and that to the community, if maybe you can comment on that.
Sure, through the chair. As you know, there's 3 lines of defense in the fire service. So obviously public education is the first pillar, fire prevention is, and enforcement actually is the second, and suppression is the third line of defense. So if we have some more time, the firefighters really enjoy getting out into the public to take those opportunities to educate. We've had an active after the fire, which was an example that you just suggested on Brybeck, where we'll go into a community and after the fire's actually occurred, and deliver a fire safety message so that it doesn't recur. So I would say public education, that's the #1 line of defense. And if we have more time and availability, that's what we would dive into for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it is very much appreciated.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Johnston. Mayor Urbanovic.
Thanks very much, Chair Ioannidis, and it's a bit, I don't know, I guess reflective as I read this report and thought back to my own beginnings at the City of Kitchener as a young university grad, fresh out of Laurier, and hired in the planning department to actually do the 1991 study, whose work started in 1989. Councillor David would appreciate this, on an old IBM PS2 computer and some software that allowed us to figure out where the fire station should go. So it's kind of neat to see this report before us today. I do have a few questions, and I do want to compliment everyone for for their work, but in particular, Assistant Platoon Chief O'Halloran and Ms. Folds, because I know how much work has gone into preparing this report. You know, when I look at the presentation in the report, it included many, a lot of stats and data. And I think it's really important that, for the community, we have a clear message around why, we need to do what's being proposed here. And so if one of you can just very clearly say what the main reason is our response times are longer than the NFPA standard so often, and hence why we need to take the proposed steps.
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor, it's a number of reasons, to be honest. So it's the sheer call volume. So we're out of our stations and not responding from home base. It's the intensification, the increased traffic. So it's a number of reasons that we're not meeting those response times. And so to highlight this just a step further, if one of our stations is out, say in the downtown, that leaves the rest of their district, which is substantial, wide open. So if we get another incident, a truck has to come from a station that's further away. So therefore, the 5 minutes goes out the window because they're striving to make 5 minutes in their own district. And then, as you can see, it would cause a ripple effect.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I see Mr. May turned on his screen as well. I don't know if he wanted to say something or.
No, I was going to ask APC O'Halloran as the one that was on the truck last, if he had anything to add.
Through the chair, I would say the 1980 and the 1991 study did an excellent job accurately predicting the growth that Kitchener would be facing and what we would need to do to meet an effective and efficient emergency response. In that report, an 8-station model was recommended back in 1991 based on the projected growth. And we're now at a point where that response times are being impacted and we need to finish that model. Thanks to that project back then, we have an incredibly effective model, but our efficiency is currently being impacted by our high call volumes. So finishing the model would greatly improve our overall service delivery.
And I think it, would it be fair to say that, and this is, I guess, a shout out to our, successive fire management, but between, the proactive work that fire management did, along with, trying to manage urban sprawl, we were able to keep ourselves to the existing station model as long as we did. And now we're in a situation where, ultimately we need to move forward. And while, the report says, a big part of this is because of the intensification we're seeing in the downtown. I think it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this station will in fact reduce responses times at the other stations around the city, correct?
So I can jump in there. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that while we need to conduct a study next year that'll find the specific location for a new station, it will be located somewhere in or around the downtown. Because that's the 8 model. So we have 7 stations in the suburbs and then one that is kind of the hub of the model. But as you add that new station, it is likely that we will be able to reduce the response areas for some, most, or all of the other stations across the city, which would then result in faster response times across the city.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for those responses, and I'll save my comments until the end.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wanting to look at this in at the bigger picture. And if I look at page 23, where it refers to the number of calls per year in the graph that's provided, it looks to me like the increase in calls is mostly in the medical field. that the fire alarm calls and the other categories, pretty well, it's hard to tell exactly because the numbers are not there. It looks like in maybe 2018, the fire calls were up, but then they came back down again in 2019. So my question has to do with the other services. And I appreciate what Mr. May said about, you know, the role of the fire department, but I still wonder whether, or what we know about the increased services that are being contemplated in the EMS field, because you know, we think of the efficiencies in hospitals and how we have triage, and the triage, you know, sends some patients here, some there, some are in the waiting room longer than others, based on need and urgency. It seems to me that there isn't that triage arrangement. Am I correct in saying that, between police, fire, and EMS? And would it be worthwhile to work with those other bodies to come up with what might be a triage system so that firefighters or suppressors would be doing just that, and that and I know that you don't have the power to put more money into EMS, but I just wonder if there's a problem with the way the whole system is arranged.
I can get started on that. So through the chair, they actually do triage. So if I remember correctly, ambulance has 4 codes: code 1, code 2, code 3, and code 4. So that's all their patient transfers, their low priority calls. We only assist them with code 4 priority. So if it's life threatening, our tiered response agreement, which we negotiate and sign with them yearly, also highlights the type of calls we go to. So 2 things we need to probably focus on, to your point. And number 1 would be to refine our tiered response agreement, because if they highlight one symptom, that triggers our response. But that symptom may not be why they're actually calling. And the other piece is we need to educate our city so they don't think they get front of the line access in an ambulance when they get picked up to go to the hospital. Because I think a lot of the calls aren't at the point where it should be code 4, if that makes sense. So it's high call volume, low risk.
Okay. So you don't see any, like when you look at this graph, you don't see that maybe the resources, you know, not just for the fire department, but maybe for the medical services department or EMS needs to be rethought. But again, that's not something you can answer, so I'll just leave it at that. Another question I had is, can you explain to us what the collaboration looks like among the different fire departments in the region? So, you know, if there were greater collaboration or partnering, would that reduce the need for another 20 firefighters? Or, and I assume there is collaboration already, but can you just explain that to us?
Through the chair, absolutely. So informally, we have what we call a mutual aid agreement. So if Waterloo has a call for help, they notify Kitchener Fire, and if we have units available, we'll go and assist. And so it's mutual. If we're in a situation where we need some extra assistance, we'll call on our neighbors, Waterloo, Cambridge, and sometimes even the townships if it's requiring that special apparatus. We don't have any formal agreements so that it's triggered at dispatch. So those would be paid for service, and it'd be a reciprocal. It's a good thing to have, and it's certainly a benefit to the departments. However, I would suggest we would probably be called into the other municipalities more often than they'd be called in to help Kitchener.
Because of their staffing levels?
I'm not sure if it's because of their staffing level or if it's just because they only have so many stations. So for a structure fire, as Pat described earlier, it clears out up to 3 stations. So if Waterloo has a fire and another call, they don't have a single resource left to go to the next incident. So that's when we would assist them. just as an example.
Right. Okay, I just have one last question, and this might be for Mr. May, and that is, you talk about taking the building of the additional fire hall out of DC funds. Can you just remind us what DC funds are used for and what areas might otherwise benefit from these funds?
Sure. So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to try this, and Mr. Lockenbach is probably really nervous that I'm going to answer this question now. So Jonathan, please correct me if I say anything incorrectly. But DC funds are to be used for growth eligible capital costs, and they are divided out by certain types. So there is the one I'm most familiar with is recreation. And there's a certain limit to how much from DC funding you can provide to recreation. One of the other categories is fire. And so you cannot use fire funds to spend on a recreation complex, as an example. It's very prescriptive in terms of the types of expenditures you can make in those.
So does it specify in the DC fund, like what percentage then goes to fire?
Jonathan?
So through the chair, as part of the DC bylaw that's done every 5 years, it identifies the capital costs related to the different service areas. So fire has a fire station that was identified in 2027. We're doing an update this next year, and that will move the station to the timing that's referred to in the report. So it does identify the capital costs related to growth, and this is one of those elements in terms of adding a new station that has been identified in the DC study, including equipment that would also then be used to fund the acquisition of that as part of the growth allocation.
So that's already allocated for 2027, you're saying?
There's currently amount included in the DC study for a new fire station. What will happen through the DC update is we'll refine those costs to reflect what the updated fire station expected costs are, aligned with the new timing that's identified in this report.
Okay, so it's not mandated by the province. It's so much of the DC charges have to go to fire. It's just so happens that in the 10-year forecast, that's already been allocated. Is that correct?
There's a certain calculation that does take place to assess what your existing service level is and what the maximum amount that you can actually allocate for growth within each category. So fire has a set amount and it's identified through the process of updating the DC study in terms of how those costs change. And typically we do that every 5 years because of the change in legislation. We'll be doing an update in 2022 to the DC bylaw to take advantage of some legislative changes that were recently passed last year or the year before.
Okay, thank you. I'll have comments later, but thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And my apologies during the staff presentation. I had to step away for a minute. So if this information was already covered, just let me know. Again, I did hear the part, again, the pressures on response time is obviously density and the number of buildings that have come up. Did staff address the number of buildings that have come online over the last 5 years? To my count, I think it's around 12 plus that are 9+ stories. And then it's easy to see if you just go around the downtown or downtown boundary, we have currently 9 cranes up. Is that the greatest pressure that the fire department is trying to address? And is this going to be exacerbated problem with the additional buildings that are not completed yet, that will be, let alone the additional development that will come in a number of years as well, if we do nothing at this point?
I would say it's not the sole problem, but it's a big part of the problem. So you're right, and that's why we're here today, so that we can address it now, and then in 2025, 2026, we'll be in better shape.
So, Chief, what I'm trying to get at is development is going on a pace far faster than a lot of times communities can plan accordingly for. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's great that we're able to attract this development to our community as opposed to it going somewhere else. And this is exactly what we need for a growing city like ourselves. But planning for a fire station can take a number of years in budgeting and cost allocation and planning towards it, whereas these buildings are coming up in a far faster pace. So what my question is, we don't have much time to lose on this one.
Agreed. So through the chair, that's why we're phasing in the additional firefighters over the 4 years. So hopefully in 2022, we'll get an influx of 6 additional staff, followed the following year. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. May, but I believe it's 5 the next year. So with that additional 11 staff, that would give us resources to upstaff perhaps an aerial truck or put another engine into service, even though we don't have a station for it.
Absolutely, and absent which their lives are at risk. So we have a certain responsibility to meet that. The other is my question, some of which I had brought up during meeting that staff had with members of council. Some of the points I had raised was through the station study, where the station would be best suitable for. The point that I had raised is, could it be along the Waterloo-Kitchener boundary of our downtowns, where again, we would be future planning towards possible amalgamation, or again, the fact that we can have cross collaboration where we can help serve them, as well as any future growth of fire stations that they have in their downtown could assist us as well down the road. Again, what priority would that take in that planning? The other question I had raised was along with increased calls and our the agreement that we have with the Region of Waterloo for first response, and the fire department is called to many calls that are not necessarily fire related only. Not to say that's not the right course to take, but again, it does exert increased pressure on our resources. Are we adequately billing the region, or are we billing the region at all? And if not, is that the necessary discussion that we need to continue to start having? And the last point I had raised was regarding, again, for fire incidences, are we able to adjust some of that cost towards insurance companies? Again, a lot of the rebuilding cost to fire damage, homeowners are protected through the insurance company. Can we, as a fire department, as a city, recoup some of the cost of response time to the fire incident?
So through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll try to take the first and the third question, and I'll leave it to the chief to respond to the second one. So in terms of the specific station location study, yes, as part of that study, we're going to look at partnerships. And so that's not just other fire departments, but also EMS as an example. And is there an opportunity to form some partnerships with them? So that will be part of the study. What I would say is, based on our experience over the past several years, Kitchener Fire Department is called in and goes into the city of Waterloo much more often than they come in to help us. And so we would want to be careful that we may actually end up sending our people into Waterloo and having our downtown and other areas uncovered. So we would have to be very careful about any partnerships. And then in terms of your third question, we're one of the few cities in Ontario who does charge insurance companies for some operational costs. To be honest, it's nowhere near the amount of revenue we had hoped when we first brought it in many years ago, but it is something that we are doing that other fire departments, for the most part, don't do.
Are we charging adequately, Mr. May, or is there room for us to negotiate, more?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do not believe there is room to negotiate more. We are, it's a challenge to get them to pay what we have, and to push any harder, they would simply not pay.
Okay, all right. And the other question was regarding our response to non-fire related incidences with the agreement with the Region of Waterloo for first response.
Through the chair, as far as I know, we don't get any monetary remuneration. The only thing that we get is the equipment that we use from our stock. They reimburse us the equipment, so defibrillator pads and ventilators and such.
Mr. Chair, I don't have any other questions. I just want to quickly make a final comment to those responses. And again, there's no blame to our staff, obviously. But I think through the questions and the answers, it's clear to see that we are trying to meet an increasing demand for service, and the costs are significant. And I think we need to start having that collaborative, and it needs to be collaborative conversation with our community partners, where there is an absolute cost of sharing of this. Otherwise, for us to do it alone, it's just too much pressure on our taxpayer alone to do it. But again, absent of those agreements, we need to proceed forward with ensuring the safety of our citizens and allocating increased service to our downtown as well. So thank you to staff to bring this report forward and bringing to light the deficits that exist within the fire department.
Thanks, Councillor Singh. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair Ioannidis. I want to thank staff for bringing this forward. I think that it's high time that we do our best to respond to the growing need of downtown dwellers that are increasing by the thousands right now. And then we've got so many more buildings on the horizon, just within the foreseeable horizon in the next few years. So it's a need already now, but the need will only increase starkly. What I'm curious about is if we have a concrete plan for where those new firefighters will be working out of, and if we have a need for a temporary location until the new fire station gets built.
Through the chair. So in the short term, as soon as they're hired, we have spots on trucks for them. So our staffing, as I said earlier, is a minimum of 35. That's with 2 people, 2 staff per aerial or ladder truck. And there's 4 positions on each one. So 6 new staff spread out across 4 platoons is basically 1.5 bodies per platoon. So in the first year, I don't think it's going to make a significant impact, but by year 2 or year 3, we should notice a huge difference.
Okay. And so with the same number of, and then are we also increasing the number of trucks? I think you said earlier in response to a question that we would bring on board a new aerial or recommission one. I'm not sure, but can you tell us, like, is there actually a space for that truck to be commissioned before the new station is put in place?
Through the chair, I believe that's all scheduled through the capital budget. However, we have reserve pumpers that we use when we take our frontline trucks out for service or they need repair. So we would just likely deploy one of those as a full-time engine and maybe couple it at a station that has an extra bay.
Yeah, good. So we have a little bit of capacity while we wait for the new station to be built. Okay, great. I'll have just a few comments, Mr. Chair, at the time.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to refer, I don't know who can answer this question, which one of you, but on page 4, towards the bottom of page 4 or page 20, if you look at the total pages, there's a list of items of changes that have been made by the department over the last few years. Okay, and most of those changes are a result of decisions by previous councils, and they weren't easy decisions. And I want to ask you now, in hindsight, if you can tell me, as a result of making those changes, can you tell me what has happened, what the impact was, whether positive or negative?
Through the chair. So some of those changes through taking trucks out of service were to facilitate the opening of a new station and reduce the impact of the 20 hires. So for example, when Station 7 opened 13 years ago, to reduce the number of firefighters required to staff that station, they creatively took some other pieces of apparatus out of service, took that staffing, moved it to Station 7, and then the impact of the new hires was lessened.
No, and I appreciate that. So I'm trying to find out, did it work? Did these changes, were they able to help out at the time, or is there a lot of downfall because of those changes?
Through you, Mr. Chair. From my perspective, it did what council wanted it to do, which was save money. And for many years, we've been the beneficiary of those savings. But it did cause situations where we had to remove a truck out of service more often than we did prior to some of these changes. And so there was a service level impact. We've been able to manage until now, but I think what the chief is saying is there's just too much growth we can manage no longer.
No, and I'm not, I'm not asking you to, I just wanted to find out a question. We did make some changes and we were able to live with it. And yes, going forward, you've gone as far as you can go. We have to make more changes, but I just want to look at the past. Now I have a theoretical question, probably for the chief. What can you speculate as to what would happen if all of our fire departments in the region were all combined into one unit? Would there be, because I know when this comes out now in the next few days, when we're talking about adding 20 firefighters and all that, people are going to come up with this whole question, why aren't they all amalgamated? And so I just like to be prepared for that. In your opinion, if all the fire departments were combined, do you see a lot of savings or costs for our taxpayers?
Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to let the chief respond, but I really do want to be careful. This is not, amalgamation is not a staff decision. So I'm happy to hear his input, but I would like to walk this fine line here where he can provide professional expertise.
Yeah.
Through the chair, thanks for that bailout. You're right, it's not our decision. And when it was proposed years ago and Toronto went through it, I believe the management team at the time was preparing for such a thing. However, that desire went away and it may resurface. There would possibly be advantages to amalgamation. It's expensive. And I still believe that where the stations are located currently in Cambridge and Waterloo and Kitchener, there'd still be some construction and capital costs to put them in the right places. But the decision to amalgamate is at a much higher pay grade than my own.
No, I didn't want to put it there. I wanted to, the reason I mentioned it is because, as I say, going forward in the next few weeks, I'm sure people will be asking those sorts of questions, but I wanted to mention it because Kitchener Fire Department has already done a tremendous amount of amalgamating in that we have one dispatch operation for the entire region. I know that in a lot of areas, we have taken a lead in training and whatnot. The point is that we've already done a lot of amalgamating already, and have been able to do it with each of the municipalities still having their control over their own fire department. So it's just a point that I wanted to give you a chance to bring it up. Okay. One final question. In talking with you and in your report, I would like just a little more explanation, concern with why it takes so many firefighters to look after high-rise buildings, and that you're saying that logistically right now we really can't look after them, and going forward, this is going to be a even more serious problem. So how do we deal with it? And my final part of that is, should there be some special kinds of levies for high-rise buildings? Because they require, in order to give them fire protection, which is very important, they require more firefighters. That's a theoretical question too.
Absolutely. Through the chair, I'm going to defer this one to Assistant Platoon Chief O'Halloran, who still actively rides the truck and is in incident command operations.
Through the chair, to answer your question, Councillor, high-rise buildings come with a increased risk and liability, which requires a higher level of response. there are a lot more tasks that have to occur to get firefighters to the positions that they need to be to effectively and efficiently put the fire out, while also effectively rescuing the residents that are on scene. So there's positions like lobby control, elevator safety and such, and all that's going on in addition to the fire being put out itself. So it requires a larger number of people. And as discussed during the presentation, we're into a situation in Kitchener where sometimes we're having multiple incidents going on at the same time. So we're not necessarily, our effectiveness is being inhibited because we don't necessarily have the right number of people to respond to these emergencies that are all occurring at the same time. As said, the high rises require a higher level of response. You touched on levies and increases there. I think that's something that, as Chief Gilmore had talked about, is outside of our pay grade, but I'm sure that's something the council could look at a future date.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we have not looked at a levy, and you wouldn't want to do that outside of all of the other municipal costs, because as we know, building in the greenfields is more expensive than building in the downtown. And so I think you couldn't just pull fire out and say, let's have a special levy for the high rises, because the fact that they're in the downtown actually saves the municipality money in other locations.
Okay. Okay. I'm not sure. Councillor Davey, you have another question? Or you're in for comments?
Comments.
Okay. And Mayor Verbanov, you're in for comments as well?
No, actually, I do have a couple questions of clarification.
Okay.
One's a question, one is just a clarifier.
Okay, hold on one sec. Just hold on one sec.
Yep.
And Councillor Gazzola, are you done with all your questions?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Mayor Vanovic.
Thanks. Just for absolute clarity, because I know there's some mixing going on here around number of stations versus efficiencies, if there was, any sort of, further collaboration all the way through to amalgamation of fire departments. What we're dealing with today is really about making sure we can continue to provide service to our residents as a result of location of stations, growth of the community. And that's what we're talking about today. There's a separate issue, and many people have sort of worked around it, and I think Councillor Gazzola was bang on when he made his point, was there are places where sure there can be efficiencies, but we've done a lot of that already. For example, we have a consolidated dispatch that involves all 7 municipalities. We share things like one river unit, we share in areas where we can. Is that correct, Chief?
That is correct. And like I mentioned earlier, we also have aid agreements when another municipality needs assistance, the neighboring municipality will go.
Yeah, and probably the most recent example for everyone's benefit of that, and I know Mayor Jaworski was appreciative of that, was when the Waterloo Inn fire happened. There was also an industrial fire at the same time, and they needed to call on us to assist with that. The only other point, I know there's been a couple references here to bill backs on police, on fire to the region and vice versa. I really want to caution my colleagues in terms of going in that direction, because wearing my regional hat for a moment, as much as we might have some bill backs of them, there are many instances in those other 2 services where there would be bill backs coming to us, and we can create a whole other accounting department to manage all that. That would probably be more costly than any of the net results from those bill backs. So I'm just going to make that clarification, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman, are you questions? Comments? Okay. I guess my question is, I have one question quickly, and I'm not sure if you can answer that, Chief, or not. And the mayor did bring it up as well. When we do have that, those aid agreements, we don't charge the that municipality for that aid, do we?
So not under, or sorry, through the chair, through yourself, not under our current arrangement, which is called mutual aid. So that's just an aid program that it's case by case or call by call. It's not predetermined.
Okay. And do you know, and then maybe Mr. May can answer that. Do you know when that agreement comes up again?
Through the chair, honestly, I don't know when the last time that mutual aid agreement was renewed. I do know that there are municipalities, I'll give you an example, North Dumfries, which covers half of New Dundee Road on the 401 side, and Kitchener looks after the other half. So they're looking to actually formalize some aid agreements so that we would be there first to get things set up, because their response time, obviously coming from the town of Ayr, is considerable. So there's possibilities like that that could happen.
Okay.
Just a matter of formalizing them.
Okay. And the reason why I'm just leaning towards that, I don't have issues with helping out our communities, our fellow communities, but if it seems like we're consistently being leaned upon to help other communities, I think there should be some form of a cost back to us. And that's just my opinion on that. But I don't mind on occasion, definitely let's help out our neighbors. But anyways, okay, so we are off to comments, and Councillor Davey, you are up first.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank Chief Gilmore, Assistant Platoon Chief O'Halloran, and Ms. Folds for their work on this. I really appreciated it. This report is a long time coming. I do want to speak to the notion that Councillor Gazzola said a lot of people are going to look at the 20 firefighters as the headline on this. And I hope that when these stories get reported, the reality that this council and myself as well have been, we've been tough in the fire department. And to be honest, in the last my 11 years, the complement of firefighters has gone down, not up, despite population increase. That's a very important note to take away. I was also took a quick look. I was surprised to find out it was included in the report that in 1991 there was only 34 firefighters active at one time. Today, there's 35. And meanwhile, the population, I went back and looked in 1991, was 168,000 people. So the population of Kitchener has gone up by some 50%, and the number of active firefighters has gone up by about 3. Okay, so we're at a point where if anyone questions the firefighters that we're adding in terms of sustainability or in terms of efficiency, I hope that those numbers are included, because our fire department is extremely efficient. Okay, now we're at a point where you have to go and add some more, and it's being staged over a number of years, and I think it's being done in a completely responsible way, and one that reflects the population growth and the challenges we have. So I want to compliment staff for coming forward with, I think, is a very reasonable approach. We definitely put some tough questions out there in terms of amalgamation and that sort of thing. And it sounds like the responses I heard said, yes, we're planning for that. We're planning for mutual aid. So I'm happy to approve this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying that safety is first, and I'll support what's being proposed here. But I do believe that emergency response services should be looked at holistically and possibly reorganized to best service residents with not a lot of overlap. And I'm not talking here about bill backs. I'm talking about ensuring that EMS is properly funded, and that if there's a need to increase EMS to service the medical needs in the community, that should definitely be done. And that, yeah, so I support it. I just want to, I just put that clarification in, because I would never want to see us in any way compromise the safety of the community. So it's in that regard that I will support what's being proposed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Singh. Are you having some technical difficulties, Councillor Singh?
I was, and I fixed it. Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. And thank you for your indulgence. You know what? There have been a lot of tough questions asked of our staff, and in many cases, not fair, because the questions asked went far beyond the subject at hand. But I think it's important to have initiated that conversation. We do need to have a wider holistic approach in seeing exactly how we manage our growth, how do we manage our resources, and how do we incorporate our resident safety in that. But right now, with what staff are recommending, and it's been said earlier, I think it's a very rational and reasonable planning. From the report itself and from the data, it's very clear. I think we're trying to best manage within the resources we have to meet our legislative requirement. We're not necessarily superseding those requirements beyond leaps, as we should endeavor to try to do so, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is people's lives, and it's impossible to put a value on even a single life. So when it comes to cost, we need to absolutely do the best that we can, what's responsible of us, and this is a good conversation, incorporating our future growth, incorporating a more complexity to our community that's existed in the past. We're dealing with high-rise buildings, and staff have said this is not the only reason we're looking at staff complement increase, but it is a part reason, and it will be a growing reason because we have far more density coming in our core that increases additional risk, not necessarily to our residents, but to our staff as well, to our firefighters. So we want to make sure that they're properly resourced for safety of all, and this is the right course to do. And at the same time, I think we're incorporating this increase over a period of time. It's not all of a sudden of a hiring spree, but we are realizing that the demands that are there, and we want to make sure that we're properly placing them as a population increases as well. We're at this point in my mind, it has been said earlier as well, we're playing catch up. And it's not safe to play catch up when it comes to fire safety. So quite supportive of the approach that staff are taking. But I also encourage staff to look at the very discussion that we had today to ensure that we are looking at, mitigating the resource cost, to ensure we can recover where we can, to ensure that we partner where we can, and at the same time, plan according to our future growth of our community, not just Kitchener alone, but Waterloo region, and more importantly, Kitchener-Waterloo, and how we might not necessarily say amalgamate, but how we may morph together in future times. So thank you to staff, thank you, Chief Gilmore, and all involved.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis, and I really want to thank Chief Gilmore, Deputy Chief O'Halloran, and Ms. Folds for this excellent report and the great communication you've had with council before this. I want to thank the fire department too for making these sacrifices and adaptations and ways to save money over the years. But now safety is definitely an issue, and as our city has grown, and we will continue to grow and grow up in the downtown core, this just makes so much sense. It's something that we need to do for the safety of our residents. It's good that some of these things that have come out today, like how firefighters are the suppression staff are the first on scene, so they can administer CPR, they can get the defibrillator out to save the life, and until ambulance and emergency services people get there to continue on. The role of suppression staff goes far beyond just putting out fires. We heard some of the many ways that they help out. I personally am so appreciative of the staff of Station 3 and 4 in my ward, who have always responded and reached out when it comes to can you show up at a neighbor's day and promote fire safety, going as far as taking part in walking to school days with the students. So a lot of good work being done in the community. I know that's going to continue and get even stronger, and be very helpful in the downtown core as well. So looking forward to support this and deep appreciation of what our fire family do for us.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Ioannidis. I won't repeat what my colleagues have said before me. I do want to just add that I look forward to working with staff when we are developing the location review for where this downtown adjacent or downtown station will go. And I think there's no better time to approve this recommendation here on Fire Prevention Week. So thank you again to all the staff who've been involved in bringing this forward today.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Mayor Urbanovic.
Thanks, Chair Ioannidis, and thank you to Councillor Galloway-Seelock for moving the motion, and for Councillor Davey for so well summarizing many of the reasons for this, as others have, and Councillor Marsh reminding us that it is Fire Prevention Week. You know, I think it says a lot when over 40 years ago, the report that was written said we need to do this, and today we're at this point where we're looking at it. It was something that was confirmed again 30 years ago, and since then yet again. And I think, as I said earlier, it really speaks to the leadership that we've had in the fire department and successive councils to be able to look at operational efficiencies and finding ways to avoid these costs until they were absolutely necessary. I think the recommendation that's before us is certainly because of some of the growth that we're seeing, particularly in the core of the city. But I think it's absolutely essential to be clear that the direction that we're talking about, while yes, it does benefit the core, it in fact benefits the entire city, because as response times change and response locations change for every station, that will benefit others throughout the community. I know that some has been said about tiered response and what role should fire play versus others in it, and I think it's always important to have that discussion. But until someone's in in a situation in their own family where you want it and need a tiered response because ambulance cannot be there for a whole variety of reasons, having both fire and police being there to help ensure that person stays alive is incredibly important, and probably speaks to the fact of why the fire department, together with our library service, are often the two most rated, highly rated services by our ratepayers in the community. So I am fully supportive of this recommendation, and I'm hoping that this will be a unanimous vote, and I will ask for a recorded vote, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Urbanovic, and I will make my comments as well. I think it has been mentioned earlier that the amalgamation and the stuff with working together with other services and in the community. I think that has been looked at backwards, sideways, upside down. You can name it's been looked at so many times over the years, and we can still continue to see the model the way we operate here at the City of Kitchener. And to me, and it's still I can't get over the fact that we have one lower staff member than we did in as complement since 2011 to me. And then on top, we are actually helping our neighboring communities as well. Like, it's just staggering on the amount of efficiency that we have able to get out of our fire department, and on top still have safety as the most paramount in my mind, and as well as everyone in the between the management of in the fire department and our deputy CEO and our former councils and former chiefs. So I think it's a testament to how well run the whole organization has been over the years. And it's time. And, you know, even like, I can't even recall this in my time here that we have ever been asked for more staff. So, I mean, in 11 years, that's impressive. And with that, Councillor Galloway Seelock, go right ahead.
Is Councillor Gazzola before me? Has he already made his comments?
He's already made his comments, yes.
No, I didn't. No.
You didn't?
No, I had a number of questions.
Okay.
I really don't have any comments. I'm totally supportive of where we're going, and it's pretty obvious the way all of council feels about it. The only reason I did put my hand up is that even though I suspected it's going to be a unanimous vote, it is a very important topic and vote that I was going to ask for a recorded vote, and the mayor's already asked for that. So I just explain why I had my hand up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to add that this is a critical service that we have in the city of Kitchener, and that we need this service to support Kitchener. And that's what the recommendation does. The data shows that we are not at the top for firefighters per 100,000 residents. And this recommendation doesn't even put us at the median of those comparator groups. So this is something that we need to do, and we need to move forward with it. So I will support staff recommendations.
And with that, it's been moved by you, and it's a recorded revote. So I guess I will go by, okay, where are we? Who's, okay, let's go. Councillor Marsh. In favor? Okay.
Sorry, in favor. I couldn't get to the button. No.
Okay. Councillor Chapman,
In favor?
Councillor Johnson,
In favor.
Councillor Singh,
In favor?
Councillor Galloway Seelock,
I'm in favor.
Councillor Michaud,
I'm in favor.
Councillor Schneider.
In favor.
I forgot Councillor Gazzola. Councillor Gazzola.
In favor.
And Councillor Davey.
In favor.
And myself in favor. So
And
it's,
hold on, you forgot the mayor.
oh yeah, and the mayor. Sorry, I'm eager to get this passed.
He's in favor as well.
Okay, so that is unanimous. And I guess that concludes our meeting today, which is